Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Warrant Committee meeting. We have a couple of folks who are running late with the weather, and they're going to join us, but we have a quorum, so we're going to get started. May I ask somebody to give a motion on the minutes?
I'd like to motion approval of the minutes for February 6th.
Second.
Thank you, Betty. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. I want to briefly reference the schedule that's before us. Our next meeting is going to be on February 22nd. We will be having the schools back in to talk about their budget. And then our next meeting after that is March 1st, where we will discuss planning board, budget and articles, the town government study committee articles. I've also reached out to the capital improvement planning committee to see if they could confirm that date. Do you know, Steve, if they confirmed March 1st or not?
I don't know.
I'm waiting to hear back from Amy on that one, but hopefully it will fit in. And then you see the rest of the meetings proceeding thereafter. Hopefully we can get through a slew of Board of Selectmen articles this evening, and that will help to outline how many of those Monday meetings that we'll have in March going forward. Does anybody have any questions about the schedule?
No.
Okay, well, in terms of subcommittees, I just wanted to note that you're still waiting for questions on the school committee, right? And when is your meeting, Betty?
Next Wednesday morning at 7:15.
Okay, cutting it close. Okay, so
Well, because of the snow, we had to
Sure.
cancel one of the meetings that we were planning.
So folks should get questions to Betty, I would say no later than Sunday, because you want to give them to the school committee so that they have a couple of days to prepare for your meeting on Wednesday morning. And is there anybody else, planning board is coming up, anybody else who's waiting for questions from people? I don't think so. All right, well, I'll take this opportunity to just say, those of you who are subcommittee chairs, you will be expected to write the comment that is in the warrant committee, and those are going to come due in a couple of weeks. So we've talked about this before, just a heads up, you could be working on those now. We haven't voted the final budgets, you know, things are likely to change, but some of that is boilerplate. And if you wanted to get started, or if you wanted to just at least read the last comment or two to catch up, that might save you some time later. Yes?
Do we have impact statements yet?
Not yet. We haven't received any yet, and I asked for them all to be submitted prior to the 22nd. So I have spoken with Mr. Dennehy a couple of times, and he said they're getting pretty close to submitting them.
Because we really have to look at them before we can write the articles.
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Anything else on the schedule or subcommittee work? Okay. Well, Phil Joe Henning is here. He asked for a couple of minutes of our time to make a comment on the school budget. He is already committed to be at another meeting on the 22nd when we're discussing the school budget. So he asked if he could come tonight, and he said he'd keep it to 3 minutes, but we'll give him 5. Hi,
Thank you. Hi, I'm Phil Joe Henning, 23 Parkwood Drive. Over the last 2 years, I've been very concerned about the mix of school costs between administration and teaching. I requested 2 years ago a stack of job descriptions from the superintendent, and I went through them trying to figure out what it is that everybody does who is non-teaching. There are a lot of different kinds of positions in non-teaching. Some of them are essential, like librarians, like custodians, like things like that. But the bulk of the dollars don't come from there. They come from principals, vice principals, that assistant superintendents, things like that. And what I'm concerned about is that it looks like schools are about half the town budget. And I'm not sure that's exactly accurate, because what I noticed when I requested information this year about salaries by position. And what I noticed was that the salaries seemed to tie out to the budget presentation. So I began to wonder, where on earth are benefits, retirement and health primarily? And I don't know that they're actually in the school budget. Perhaps they're in another line item in the town. I don't know. But my thought is that in order to properly show, if I'm correct, the school budget, it would have to be a burden school budget. It would have to show the benefits in addition to the salaries, in addition to all the other miscellaneous costs. I don't think that our town is on a sustainable path. I don't think that we can always count on getting Prop 2.5 overrides. And I think the solution comes on the revenue side and on the expense side. And since the schools are such a significant portion of the budget, I think the schools have to address their own spending. And again, I'm not talking about teaching. I think teaching is essential. I'm talking about non-teaching positions. It's really hard for me to make clear determinations with the information I have and with the experience I have. So, I may or may not be correct, but I shared my thoughts with Glenn, and he didn't really come back and deny anything that I had claimed. I think that administration, non-classroom people in the schools are about $9.6 million in direct salary. That's a lot of money. That's about 27% of the salary budget for the schools. I guess my question of you is, does it make sense for more than 1 out of every 4 people in the school department, and we're talking in salary dollars, to be outside the classroom, to be non-teaching? And I wonder, would it make sense to drive the ratio from 27% down to 20, so that it's not more than 1 out of every 4, but 1 out of every 5 people is in a non-teaching position? If we were to change it from more than 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 5, that would mean that the school budget would go down by $2.5 million in salaries alone. I think, who can say what the right mix is? But I think more than 1 in 4 could be excessive. And again, I'm talking in terms of salary dollars and not head count. I think that it's appropriate now to challenge the schools to do away with some of the admin support that as I read the job descriptions, I came to the conclusion, having never worked in a town and having never worked in a school district, but having worked all my life in private industry, I do not think that the people, the job descriptions for the non-teaching positions are overburdened. That was my conclusion. I think that's an issue that needs to be resolved. In private industry, typically when people aren't making their profitability targets, management will come and say, we need a 10% reduction across the board in headcount. And it's done because you have no choice. And I wonder if it might not be a good idea to challenge the schools to eliminate a certain number of non-teaching positions. Let's say that we reduced...
We're at 5 minutes.
Okay, but I'll wrap up. Let's say that we reduced from 27 to 20%. We saved $2.5 million. I guess I would propose that we use that money to provide free sports programs for children in the schools and free bus transportation to children in the schools and additional teachers rather than additional administration. Just to make a final comment, I looked at the ranking of Massachusetts public schools. Milton is at 34 on the list out of 404 school districts. Lexington is number 1, Cambridge number 10, Lenox 20, Linfield 30, and we're at 34. And I think we can do better if we use more of our resources in teaching as opposed to administrative support. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Phil. Okay. Anybody have anything else under budget articles, town meeting process timeline before we move on? Great. Steve, you want to come up and join us at the table?
Sorry about Bobby Darren's.
Yeah. This is a nice ringtone. So this is Steve Morash, and Steve is on the, say the name of the committee?
Milton Fire Space Needs Committee.
And Steve wants to get off that committee and start a new committee.
I accept the first part of that statement. If I might. Not that I don't mind serving the town. Cinda, am I getting this? Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name's Steve Morash. I'm Chairman of the Milton Fire Space Needs Committee. I live at 47 Standish Road, and I am a town meeting member from Precinct 2. Lee Michael asked me to give you a little update of where we've been and what we're doing, then we can speak to the article if you'd like. But we were appointed by town moderator in the fall town meeting of 2000, it sounds like 19, of 2013. Our charge at that point was to study the fire space needs of the Milton Fire Department and make a report back to town meeting by the annual meeting of 2014. Our committee came together in November. We studied the Milton Fire Department. We looked at other fire departments. And we produced our report, which we made to town meeting, as I said, in 2014. We were held over by the town moderator and told to do some more good work. And we weren't really sure what that meant. But we took it to the next level. With funding that was made possible through the estate of Linnea Mellon, who was a town resident up by Cunningham Park, who passed away and left a sum of money from her estate to the Milton Fire Department to do, for the benefit of the Milton Fire Department. We accessed about $75,000 of that money and hired a consultant to validate the work that we had done in our report. Were our assumptions right? Did it make some sense? And to continue coming up with conceptual plans for the town to look at of what 3 new fire stations could look like in town. And we've done that work. We have a report. We have the documents I just passed out to you. Has our website on the bottom of that. It's been there since about a year ago. And I urge you all to take a look at that website, because in it you will find many things, including our budget and what the next step of this plan would be for building and renovating 3 Milton fire stations. We have just finished conducting 3 community meetings based around the existing fire stations in East Milton, here at behind Town Hall, and up at the Atherton Street Station. We received a number of comments and questions. We've had about 200 people attend these meetings, and we're about to produce another report for a town meeting and the selectmen about what was on people's minds and what we found out about that. I can tell you that at this point in time, no one has said that the needs of the Milton Fire Department should go unmet. Everyone supports the renovation or construction of 3 new fire stations to support the town's fire department moving forward to the 21st century. There's one of the proposals for the East Milton Fire Station has had some concerns from the folks at the Milton Arts Center and the neighborhood around Hollis Street. The plan for the East Milton Fire Station, Engine 2, would be to construct a fire station on the site of the current Milton Arts Center. So that's where we are with that whole process. There are no decisions made on this or where this will go, which is why we've come back to the town and say it's time to, we believe we've done all we can do with the charge that was given to the Fire Space Needs Committee, which leads us to this article to create a fire station building committee for the town of Milton. And to meet that end, and the job of this committee, this new committee, if it passes town meeting, is to set forth the next step, which is solicit and retain the services of another architectural firm and any other consultants to begin that process of actually designing what these fire stations would look like. We have put into our program now the fire program, what's needed to support the Milton Fire Department, to bring it up to date, to bring it up to code, and to meet the requirements of the fire department in the 21st century. hopefully they'll develop design plans and qualifications that would, again, allow us to move forward with construction, the seeking funding, and then eventually construction of these 3 new fire stations. We're in this article asking for the funding of about $2 million to support this committee once it gets started. And that's for architectural and engineering documents and bid specifications, as well as handled project management costs that are normal for a project of this size. The current estimates from 2016 for this project for all 3 fire stations would be approximately $25 million. We've met with, on Monday night, we met with one of the planning committees, the master planning committee. We are setting up meetings with the capital planning committee, as well as giving an update to the Board of Selectmen, and at some point with the town government study committee. But we believe that the next step for this process is to establish this fire station building committee and let them take on the work of where are these fire stations going to go. Our current plans basically are we're going to rebuild, we're going to maintain some of the existing fire headquarters behind us, but to build that station out. You'll see that as we look at it from behind Town Hall to the left side into the parking space. And that would be, if we had to come up with the schedule, that would probably be the first station that would be built, because it allows us to do a lot of things that the fire department doesn't have right now. No training facility, not enough space, and to adequately support their needs. The second station would probably be the one at Atherton Street. And again, this is, we're not looking at demolishing that existing station, which everyone seems to love. They like the way it looks. We just don't think it functions as a fire department in the 21st century for a number of reasons. And to build 2 smaller stations, one engine station and another, if you will, an equipment building, which would house the additional equipment that's up at Atherton Street now. The boat that the fire department has, the all-terrain vehicle for responses up to the Blue Hills, and I believe another trailer that they have. And then finally, the last station, if we were doing this in some sort of an order like this, would be the East Milton station, which again would be a 1-engine company, which is what we have right now, engine 2, and putting that in the in East Milton on the across the expressway to better support the East Milton neighborhood. We did look at only town-owned property. We were trying to maintain and keep costs down. We were not charged with looking at anything other than that. We had looked at other locations, and we're told basically stay away from those properties. We're looking at doing something, notably the one on the deck. We thought that might be an option. So the only town-owned property that fit the size and requirements in East Milton was, in fact, the former East Milton, the former East Milton Library, which is what the proposal is. We believe that the building committee would make that final determination with the Board of Selectmen and town meeting, and eventually to the town. So that's kind of where we are.
It doesn't seem like there's anything in the article that would prohibit this committee from looking at non-town-owned land for those purposes.
It does not, and we've had that discussion with the Board of Selectmen, but again, it's what they would like to do.
And I recently got an email from one of the East Milton residents that I'll share with the rest of the committee, who asked why we weren't focusing on the state-owned land on Granite Ave that was maybe going to be a hotel one point and was later kept by the state. And I'm sure that has its own problems, but
We did look at that.
Okay, but it's non-town owned, so I just wanted to make sure that the article wasn't prohibiting looking at non-town owned properties in the future.
It doesn't do that, but the one thing we looked at is, and the big key to any siting of a fire station and providing fire protection for a town is response times. And fire response time, according to the standards by the National Fire Protection Association, is 4 minutes to have a piece of fire apparatus in front of a residence or any kind of occupancy when you have a fire. It's also 8 minutes for an ambulance for a medical call. The interesting thing we found out is the location of these 3 fire stations we currently have in town, even though one was originally built in 1878, the other was built in 1901, and the East Milton Station in 1951, for the most part, and about 99% of the time, meet those standards. When we looked at at a possibility of putting a station up on Granite Ave at the DPW yard, it just doesn't work on timing. I mean, it's at the farthest northern end of town, almost on the Dorchester-Milton border. You can't get to Adams Street and Lower Mills because you just can't drive across the marsh last time I checked, other than the Ponset River. So some of these things came off very quickly when we looked at them. We did look at the possibility of consolidating fire protection with just 2 stations. We looked at 2 properties that were town-owned. One is on Brook Road, kind of kitty corner to Fontbonne Academy, where there's a memorial for a Vietnam veteran that died in the war. And the second one was up off of Canton Avenue, up by the Parkway, and that was on conservation land by Pope's Pond. We were told we were never going to get the conservation land to build a fire station there. Once that came off the table, then the other station on Brook Road, they just didn't work. They come down to 2 stations. So we were forced back to the 3-station location. So that's how we arrived at the plan that we had, that we presented a couple of times now at town meeting. And but there's nothing here that precludes the building committee from looking at the work that we've done, building on it and changing on it, and do what needs to be done for the fire department.
Okay.
And for the residents.
And I know particularly the use of the Milton Arts Center site is very controversial for some members of the community. Has there been an effort to find an alternate location for the Milton Arts Center?
One of the proposals that our committee early on understood and appreciates the work of the Milton Arts Center. It's a great cultural resource to the town. It's a good recreational resource that the town has up there. And we thought that at some point when if this were to go through the way we have proposed as a committee, that you could actually make renovations on the Engine 2 quarters once they're out of there, and actually make that a space for the Milton Arts Center. We've seen great examples of former fire stations that are used for cultural centers and art centers around the country. We thought that would be an option if the town wanted to go that way. But again, not the charge of our committee. That would then become, as would the Atherton Street Station, surplus property to the town that the Board of Selectmen would have jurisdiction on of what they do with it.
And again, nothing in this article says that the Milton Arts Center has to be used or focuses even the committee on that location.
No. Again, the work of a new fire station building committee would be to take the work that was done by the Fire Space Needs Committee, look at it, bend it, shape it any way they want to, and take it to the next level.
Okay. And how did the $2 million come to be figured?
The $2 million is basically for the architectural engineering. I can give you a copy of this, Mr. Chairman. But for headquarters, it was $735,000 for A&E and another $114,000 for project management. East Milton Station, $269,000 for A&E and another $47,000, almost $48,000 for project management. And then for the Atherton Street Station, $417,000 for A&E and about $74,000 for project management. The totals on that would be $1,422,000 for architectural engineering specifications to put them out for bid, and another 236 million for project management. The total there would be,
236,000.
yeah, and some change. Basically, $1,658,430. We thought that we should build a contingency in there based on the way things normally go, and that's why we came up with a figure of $2 million to make this step of the project. Now, what we haven't talked, that's for all three of them at the same time. Based on what the town may want to do, if you want to do the headquarters piece first, well then, you need about $850,000 to do that station and then move on to the next two, but for the sake of what we were trying to do, to put that figure out there is what we did.
Okay.
And those are all, those studies are, those figures are all in the 2016 report that's on the webpage.
But they came from a consultant that
Oh, yes,
specializes in,
yeah.
right?
And our consultant was, Castle Blues Associates, who had a good track record building fire stations and public safety buildings and other government buildings throughout New England.
Great. What other questions do folks have for Steve? Yes, Betty?
When you think about the location on Brook Road across from Fontbonne Academy, that location vis-à-vis response time, how does that differentiate between the East Milton location that's the current location or the proposed location?
It made response times, and again, in conjunction with the other fire station being located up on, off of Canton Avenue, up by the Parkway. You just can't take one and move one place and not do the other one at the same time. One of the questions we had was, well, can you build it there and then put the other two stations where they are? Well, you've got two stations at that point in very close proximity that throws things off. You've got the main fire station still sitting up on, behind this building.
Right.
And that's not too far from that location at the corner on Brook Road, and I believe Central.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael?
Would
Oh,
it
I'm
be-
sorry, Maggie, I'll come to you. Michael, go ahead.
If we went to two stations, if all the conservation land problems went away, how much, will we save anything on staffing?
No. You're still gonna have 3 engines and 1 ladder company supporting the fire protection of the town. So from a you may save a little on maintenance cost, on operating costs, but you're still gonna have the same amount of square footage to do the things you're doing. You might save a little bit of money, but you'd save some, but I don't think it'd be a ton of money you'd save. Because you're still gonna have to decontaminate the same amount of equipment, do all the things you normally do for training. Those things still would have to be taken into consideration.
Maggie?
In a perfect world, if the town meeting approves this, what would be the time frame from start to finish? Let's say if you do one or all three or something like that.
I don't know the answer to that question because that's going to become a question of funding. And the funding will be tied into a lot of things we've kind of talked about in our committee. And as you know, you've got a declining debt on the school project. You've got some other debt that is coming down, but while we do that, there's still got a $30 million project we've been told for the DPW yard. So those things all need to be figured into, and I've heard there's another request from the school department. But, you know, at the master planning committee, that question came up, and our answer was, you asked us as a committee to come up and study the Milton Fire Department. Ask us what the space needs were and what the solution to that was. That's kind of what we did. And you have these other projects going on at the same time, and at some point, it's only fair to a town and to its residents, put those all on the table and say, okay, this is what we've got to build in the next 20, 30 years in this town. How do you do that? I mean, that is the, I hate to say $60 million question, but that kind of is the answer. But if you don't put all those things on the table to see what the needs of the town are, if you were doing your own budget, if you're redoing your house, you need to find out what you want to do and what it's going to cost and what are you going to do first and how you're going to get it done. So that's all this committee has done. And like I said, this fire station building committee in this article would be the next step in trying to take this to finish this project.
One follow-up question. At town meeting, if they don't appropriate the whole 2 million, let's say they want to do it in stages, as you mentioned, is it the type of article that you could have a friendly amendment to?
I'm quite sure, like all articles I've ever watched at town meeting. And I think what we'd like to probably do is have these discussions with the capital committee, with the board of selectmen, and, you know, just see what they'd like to do with this.
Okay, thank you.
And we can't vote on this tonight because we haven't heard from the Capital Planning Improvement Committee yet on where it is on their priority list. Because as the article is written down, the money would come from the general fund, but we don't actually have the cash in order to do that. So this probably would be bonded to meet some dollar amount. So there are other discussions we have to have before we vote it. Betty?
I just wanted to comment on Michael's question about the 2 fire stations versus the 3. I think back in the 60s and the early 70s, there was a lot of discussion about 2 fire stations for the whole town. But again, over the years, we didn't have Fuller Village back then. Curry College has really expanded. And all the houses over near Houghton's Pond, you know, right beside Houghton's Pond, they were not built yet. So I think that there's been such a big population up in that area that we really, I think, need the 3 fire stations, I think, because of the population shifts in the town over the years.
I mean, things have changed in this town, and things have changed in the fire department, as Betty pointed out. Fuller Village wasn't there. These are kind of last 20-year kind of things that have happened. The development out, you know, by Blue Hill. You cannot, people, you would know this, anyone that pays attention to town knows people are shoehorning in town, villages, every place they can in this town for residences. That has a burden on fire protection in the fire department. The fire department's changed, you know, and I said this during our presentation. When I was growing up, you didn't have female firefighters. Today you do. Firefighters, when I grew up, when I was a kid, wore dungarees and raincoats. They weren't wearing SCBA. I mean, all those things, they weren't wearing turnout gear. All these things and new dangers that firefighters see that as a fire department and as a town, we need to protect them. The fact that we used to build firehouses wherever you go in this country, they used to be built with a space for horses and then apparatus. Just moved it right in where the horses were. And firefighters lived up above. Well, that's not really healthy for firemen to breathe that stuff. So we've got systems, and as we build new firehouses, people say, why can't you put the new fire station for Engine 2 in the same space you got it now? Well, you have to separate, you know, the apparatus bay and that equipment, and you do that from the living space where firefighters live. So, and cancer, you know, I could tell you cancer rates in firefighters are pretty high. A lot of that's because not only what they see on the fire ground, but some of the stuff they see in quarters. So that kind of separation of space makes a lot of sense for the health and safety of our firefighters.
Steve?
Not a question so much as a comment, which is to thank you guys for the work. You're bringing the town bad news that it's going to have to spend money, and that's always hard to do. But you know, to keep the long view on this, by my count, there's 16 sort of major buildings in the town, and if we do a significant rehab on one every 5 years, that's 80 years, 16 buildings. So 80 years, if you stretch that out to 10, it's 160. So we've got to get on to you know, more regular schedule of addressing our buildings and our significant properties on a regular basis, and, you know, smooth the things out. If we'd been doing that, you know, we built all the schools at once, then the library, and since then, you know, nothing really significant, even though there's been significant needs at the fire stations, which I've visited, and at the DPW yard, which I've visited. It's just something we've got to get on track with, and, you know, it's expensive, and I don't want to pay for it any more than anybody else does, but, you know, it's the cost of living in the town.
You know, and you've heard me say at town meeting, I'm probably one of the few people that supports DPW and street maintenance. We don't even want to think about that, but that's another, I mean, as I said, you need to put it all out there for the Board of Selectmen, for town meeting. This is what we've got, and this is how you're going to deal with it, because we've been kicking that can down the street for a long time. Some point it's a dead end.
Any other questions this time? Thank you so much for coming in. We might have to have you back once we hear from Board of Selectmen and capital improvement and whatnot, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time, and thank you, and again, as a town meeting member and a town resident, thank you for all the meetings and all the work you folks do. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Chief King. So then we're going to move on at this point to the police budget, and Chief King is going to come up and join us at the table. I just want to note at this point that we owe Chief King some congratulations because he has a new addition to his family. So congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you for rescheduling. She went to labor when I was supposed to be here 3 weeks ago on that day, so. thank
One
you.
of the unintended consequences of the timing of that labor is that this meeting's a little compressed, but we don't want to give short shrift to any of our topics. So if we have to cut out some of the Board of Selectmen articles, we do have a second date for them to come back. So we can put time if we need time. And Chief King is clearly in a competition with Adam, with the library for writing the most comprehensive comment. So congratulations. It's pretty impressive. And he brought tabs. So I really appreciate all the work that you put into your budget narrative because it really helps us a lot.
Thank you.
Do you want to start with some opening comments, or Lucinda, do you want to start with any opening comments?
It's been a long time since we met. But we had a very good conversation, and we went through the analysis with him. So, sorry, I need to get over to it. And it was good having your narrative too, after reading it. You actually came out with that too. So with that, I'd rather turn it over to you.
Great.
Essentially, I might be better answering questions just because my first time, but basically, the non-contingent's pretty basic, obviously, compared to this current year. The contingent, is asking for 2 extra patrolmen, is essentially the major change in it. The issues are kind of outlined in my summary in terms of, what the department's facing. We have a high call volume, some of them very serious, some of them minor calls. You'll see in the budget, I made a couple of minor staffing changes. One was swapping a cadet position for a dispatcher position, and the other was changing the payroll clerk from 30 to 37.5 hours. Basically, the cadet dispatcher is a switch because under the law, cadets get terminated at 25 years of age, and it's costing us an enormous amount of money retraining staff. So by reducing 1 cadet and adding 1 dispatcher, we're going to reduce the costs in the training and the turnover, which also improves the proficiency of that dispatcher in the communications room. The payroll clerk, basically, she was overburdened and was working between 35 and 40 hours a week anyhow. The primary reason for that is with one of only 2 departments in the town. The DPW has overtime, the fire department has overtime, but we have overtime in private details, which, we're billing over $1 million a year. Every company has its own system, so it created basically a ton of work for her. There's a couple other reasons, contract clauses where people are paid all different rates, and she has to do multiple calculations on things that used to be just 1 calculation. So that was the reason for the increase in her hours. On the contingent budget only, there's a request for an increase in 2 patrolman positions. Basically, that's to address demand from the citizens. The number 1 calls for service, the number 1 complaints I get from residents, from town hall is, traffic, for a department our size and a community our size, it's very rare that we don't have anybody assigned to traffic. That really is an anomaly. And the other issue is substance abuse. It's become a major issue in town, and same thing, we have nobody committed to, basically substance abuse work on full time. We kind of do it on the side around other obligations. And again, that's very rare for any department our size or any community of our population. So that's in the contingent. I just comment briefly on overtime and general expenses. Most of it's pretty consistent. Gas had gone down in 16. It's come up a bit in 17. But that was the major adjustment. The rest was some minor adjustments. Ammunition costs have steadily increased over the years and been underfunded, so I made an adjustment to that. That's simply just the cost of ammunition has gone up. So that's an overview. I might do better answering questions to know what specifically you want me to address.
Sounds great. Anybody have opening questions, or do you want me to start? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the ammunition and it's rising steadily. You didn't mention that in your, do we not have a problem, too many guns on the street in Milton? Is that not an issue here?
You know, Milton, thank God, is a fairly safe community. Most of our crimes, property crime and stuff. We do tend to have a few gun arrests or calls. We it's periodic. I wouldn't say it's common at all. We're very fortunate in that sense. You know, we didn't last year have one gun incident. You know, I remember, I think it was 2 years prior, we had 6 shootings in 6 months. You know, that's unheard of in Milton, so I don't want to say that's common. It isn't. You know, do officers, encounter people on the street on minor calls that are not firearms calls and end up recovering a firearm that somebody illegally possesses? Certainly. But violent crime is pretty rare in Milton.
Do you have a follow-up
Go ahead.
question? I noticed you have a wide berth when it comes to mental health problems and violence and real social issues. Can you tie that into any other budget, any other department in the town, like the Board of Health, or do you have any help at all with those issues? I mean, these are things that we would have, psychological problems, and you have to handle that? How do you?
Yeah, well, the increase on us has come from a couple of things. Basically, what's going on in the state, and the state basically isn't funding a lot of programs, which a lot of people that need treatment for mental health, aren't getting those services. We're getting called to houses from family members. We're getting called. You wouldn't think of Milton. We've had, a fair amount of increase in homeless population in Milton, which again is not something I think people would normally think about. A lot of these people face mental health. Another reason for the increase is substance abuse. Substance abuse often is related to mental health issues. There are things we're doing working with others. I think that burden falls predominantly on the police department, because when somebody's in their house and their kid or their family member is having a mental health issue, they just call 911. For long-term working with others, we do work with the Board of Health. Caroline Kinsella, I personally sit on this, the Substance Abuse Coalition board with her. We work throughout the community, from educating people in the schools, working with Fallon Ambulance, working with Milton Hospital. Myself and Lieutenant Alba, about a year ago, partnered up with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I attend monthly meetings with them. We've set up basically kind of like a jail diversion type program, where we try and screen people that normally out on the street we were dealing with, and we had no other option. We couldn't leave them in the home. They might be violent. They might be acting irrational. They were getting arrested. And, it was a legitimate arrest. They were committing a violation, but they don't belong in a cell. They belong getting help. So we've set up some, treatment programs with this partnership we've done. But this partnership is time and, it's money, and it's getting these people a diversion, working on either sectioning them to a hospital, or if they are taken to a cell, it's a different type of section. One's called a Section 12, where we commit them to a hospital instead of bringing them in. But there's a Section 18 if they are in custody because it's a serious crime. Rather than holding them all weekend in a Milton police station where they might commit suicide, we transfer them to Bridgewater State. So we're doing a lot. We are working with some partners, but I feel that burden is predominantly on the police department.
Thank you.
Betty?
Last year, when Richard Wells was here, he was talking about the impact of Quincy Hospital's closing, and that the Milton Hospital's ER actually expanded and had a certain unit for patients who were presenting with psychiatric issues. Have the police been called up there as frequently as they have had in the past, or has that impacted your calls?
Milton Hospital has got busier since the closing, a significant amount too. We were seeing a large number of calls to Milton Hospital. I'll credit Milton Hospital. I've worked with Bob Atkinson, who oversees all their security stuff up there, and we've worked on implementing some policies. The hospital, credit to them, has done a lot of training of their staff. They have built and now have a behavioral unit where they can securely detain up to 4 people. Usually they detain them short-term and then work to transfer them through South Shore Mental Health to a longer-term facility. They've made vast improvements, which has reduced that call volume. It was increasing significantly to the point it was a major issue, but credit to them. They saw that, we saw that, and they've invested both time and money to work on that, and it has really been successful in reducing it.
Yeah. Just one follow-up. Last week on NPR, I heard of a program that I think the City of Boston has. They've got a couple of grants for mental health professionals to go with police, first responders, to those kinds of situations that are either domestic violence or substance abuse or a psychiatric patient in crisis. So I don't know if there's grant money available for that. Boston seems to have gotten some, but
Yeah,
they
we
may
work-
have more resources.
We work on that, including seeking out grants. That's part of the reason we partnered with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. You know, they have a lot of lobbying power in terms of those grants and stuff, and, you know, there's a handful of our departments. Quincy would be a local department, the closest one around here other than Boston, that does have a full-time mental health advocate inside their police station. We have a similar thing on domestic violence. We did work with Dove and Quincy, Dove Incorporated, domestic violence ended, and we have a grant through the Violence Against Women Act. We have a full-time domestic violence advocate in our police station that we don't pay a penny for. So ideally, I'd like to get the same thing in a mental health substance abuse capacity. It's just, you know, applying for grants, you know, reapplying, you know, putting in the, you know, the time and trying to get it done. But we were very successful with the domestic violence, which is a critical issue in town. We hope that the next one is a mental health substance abuse coordinator.
Chief King, could I ask you a couple of questions about the patrol positions?
Sure.
You wrote in your narrative that the positions were approved by the personnel board and that the town administrator supports them. I think one thing that would have been fair for you to have put in there as well is that the positions were approved by the personnel board a long time ago. And I think they were supported by this warrant committee in the past, but the funding wasn't there to fill those positions. Can you talk a little bit to how long it's been since the patrol staff has grown and what the need is for those positions?
Sure. You know, it's really deteriorated over the years. Basically, in 2014, FY14, I should say, there was 52 funded positions. You know, we're authorized for 56. The personnel board, the town has all approved 56. And at one point, we were at that, and it just fell down basically to 52, which is 4 short. In FY14, we were 52. In FY15, we went up to 53. We're at 54 today, but it's a little misleading. We're only still at 53 funded positions. If you see on one of the names here, Christopher Potts, you'll see his name listed in the plan here, but when you come across, he's zeroed out, so it's not a funded position. He exists because we have an agreement with the schools, where the schools pay for that position because he's assigned full-time to the schools. So, you know, it's a little misleading when you look at this, but currently there's 53 funded positions. We're authorized for 56, so we're still 3 short, but the most recent increase would have been in FY14. Going into FY15, it did go up 1 position. The need is basically, you know, what I outlined. We do have a lot of calls, and I feel that, you know, when people don't know what to do, they call the police. And, you know, our calls range from, you know, the most minor things like, you know, medical calls, burglar alarms, car accidents, to some very serious things. Property crime has increased throughout town. We have a lot of residential house breaks during the weekdays, primarily when people are at work and school. We have a lot of car breaks during the overnight hours when people are sleeping. Those are probably the 2 largest property crimes. You know, substance abuse is a factor in that. Socioeconomic, our proximity to, you know, the city and stuff like that is a major factor in that. Our call volumes increase significantly, as we talked about earlier, on mental health calls for service. Domestic violence is a large number of calls. It's probably the most common violent crime we deal with. You don't see and hear about it a lot because the law prohibits us from putting in our public logs or releasing any reports of it. So that's significantly underreported, but that's a common call. These are calls that tie people up for, you know, a significant amount of time. You go to a call and it's a domestic, you make an arrest, you have to book them at the station, you write in reports, you have to offer the people emergency restraining orders. If it's during the day, you know, you have to offer that victim assistance, transport them to court. It's not a burglar alarm where they're clear in 5 minutes. Same with these mental health issues, you know, especially if they involve juveniles, they're very complex. You know, with traffic complaints, you know, twofold enforcement. Pretty much every neighborhood group is calling the police station irate one and a police officer in their neighborhood, you know, enforcing it. And we're limited to the staffing we have now. Nobody's assigned to traffic, so it's the officer that works that sector. And you assign them to a street and say, hey, go down Church Street and, you know, do some traffic enforcement. You know, all the neighbors say that this car's speeding, they're passing school buses, it's a dangerous situation. That person gets called away every single time a call comes in their sector because we can't dedicate them because we don't have the staff or the overtime to do so. So that's where an increase in staff would make a difference. Substance abuse, like I said, I work with that coalition. I spend a lot of time with them. They're doing a great job in the town. You know, prevention is a huge aspect before the problem, but dealing with the problem is, you know, unfortunately a major thing. We're, helping families section people through the court to get them treatment civilly. We deal with not just some of the crimes people commit in, but overdoses have increased. We've had to, train everybody, equip them with Narcan. When I worked the street, car accidents was our leading cause of death other than natural causes. Now it's overdose deaths, has passed car accidents. So it's just, if you look at those two things, overdoses and car accidents are our two leading causes of death, and we don't have people committed really full-time to either of those issues. That would be concerning to me. And generally, just our call volume has increased. Like I said, technology is a huge factor. While it helps us internally in the police station, it's created a lot more crimes. Elderly, before the only crimes we had was if somebody knocked on the door and tried to con them. Now we have a large amount of financial crimes. I'm sure everybody in this room has got, a phone call or an email, and, maybe you hit delete, but unfortunately, they prey on elderly people. We've had thousands of dollars in theft. And it's not just more of those crimes, they're very complex to investigate. They take a lot of time. The officers need more training. And so it's a much bigger investment to solve these. Same on the school end. Bullying that used to be in the schoolyard and didn't follow kids home. Kids now create fake Facebook accounts, or they're sexting, or there's a lot of technology issues surfacing where we didn't see them before, predominantly in elderly and in the schools. And each one of those crimes takes more time to investigate, and it takes more training from the officers, which is an expense to us, both in losing the officer and paying for the training courses.
And I think you established why you need those two positions, but there are 2 patrol positions that were vacant at the time that you submitted this. It's my understanding that those are in the process of being filled. Do you want to address that just so folks understand how that cycle works?
Sure, absolutely. Unfortunately, we're always losing people through retirement, or people leave to other jobs or whatever. So basically, there were 3 openings. We hired 3. We went to the town with, we did the backgrounds, we screened the group, we got down, we picked 3 out. We went to the town. The town, approved 3 people. The personnel board did, the town administrator did, and as we were processing those people, they had passed backgrounds. They went forward with both medical and physicals. In that time period, one of the 3 failed a medical, so he's no longer eligible. By the time he failed it, we got the results. It's too late now to get that person to the academy. So 2 people, St. Ford and Sullivan, are currently in the academy being trained. There would have been 3, so that's 1 open. The second opening was, while all this was going on, another employee basically is no longer working with us. So a second vacancy came up. We're currently vetting that. Like I said, that was kind of one that was unanticipated. It wasn't a retirement. It was somebody who, basically was terminated. So it was unexpected opening. And like I said, the other person failing a medical. But when you fail it and you miss an academy, you might wait 6 months for another academy. And then the competition to get those spots, it's like a juggling act, because, they'll announce an academy, and we can't just say, save us 3 spots. They'll say, give us the names and show us they've passed a PAT, a medical, and a psych. And until we have that paperwork, we won't RSVP your spot. And by the time you get that paperwork, you have to send them, you have to do all this stuff. Those spots are often gone. So there were 3. We got 2 of our 3. 1 failed, no fault of ours, just basically a medical exam, kicked them out. And then the 4th opening came up. So we have filled 2 of those 4, and the other 2 we're basically currently vetting people.
Okay. I don't have a question. I'll just note that I did spend a lot of time looking at Schedule E. Normally I have some questions about this, and there were a lot of changes on this schedule. But the bottom line is that Chief King has kept his request for non-contingent the same as the fiscal year 17 appropriation. So all of the moves made sense to me. So I don't have specific questions on them, but if anybody else did, I'll ask at this point. No? Okay, but thanks for keeping that cost down. Appreciate that. Does anybody else have any other questions about the police budget? Yes, Maggie?
I just have one comment. First of all, I agree with Lee Michael. Your narrative is so good. You made all of our jobs so easy. And when we met with you, you specifically discussed the need for the 2 positions, which is, I was really amazed that that's the number 1 issue, is the substance abuse. And you expanded upon it here, but I think a lot of people don't realize just how bad it is and how it's affecting so many of the young children in our community. And we really need to get it when they're young and to take care of it there. I think that's so important. And the other issue that we talked about, and it's in your narrative, was the fact that you had over 450,000 in uncollected debts that were over a year old. And just by increasing your administrative staff, there's, what, 5 extra hours or whatever it was, now it's down to 22,000 or something like that, under 90 days. And I find that's amazing. That could pay for all 3 positions right there.
Yeah, you know, I give all that credit to the person herself, Margaret Walsh. She did an amazing job. You know, she couldn't do it in 30 hours because she didn't have the time, but what a difference, 7 hours. You know, that woman, I can tell you, before increasing that, was staying on her own. Like, she's just that great of an employee. And it really paid off. She had the time now to follow up. It wasn't just sending a bill and forgetting about it and hope they pay. It was tracking that, hey, I haven't heard back from them, sending out second invoices, getting on the phone, calling them. And like you said, the numbers are huge in the amount of money she recovered in a short period of time.
And the only other thing when we talked about was some of the people that owed the money, like N-Star and all those. I just wish there was a way that they weren't allowed to do another job until they paid, if they had long outstanding debts, that there was some way and able to say, well, sorry, you can't do that. We're not going to give you a permit. We're not going to allow it. And I know we talked about that.
We did, yeah. I mean, we've thought of it. We've here or there had a couple problems with like a long-term one where we, you know, tried to work with the town and say, you know, don't grant them a permit. But it gets tricky too on the companies because there's a difference on if they're opening a street, they need a street opening permit. But if they're working like overhead on wires, they don't. So it's not really a permit situation. It's a little tricky, but that's one of those things we'd have to work with the town, you know, over at town hall, not just the police department.
Steve?
A few questions for you. As far as the private details, going forward, is the administrative fee that you charge on top of the officer's time, is that enough to cover the cost, the town's cost to track and collect and pay that out?
Essentially, my opinion, yes. You know, that money doesn't come to us, it goes to town hall. So,
Right.
you know, I don't have the exact numbers, but, you know, if she's billing about 1.2 million and it's 10%, it's about $120,000. Her salary total, the increase and what she was before is about a third of that. So, to me, it's more than covering it. I mean, there's some printing costs and general minor expenses, but it's basically 10% of the total details, and her salary isn't even a third of that.
Different topic, grants, it seems awful slight, the amount on Schedule BC that's for any kind of grants. Are there no state, no Homeland Security other than the bulletproof vests that come to the police department?
On Schedule B, the second page, you know, it fluctuates. If you see there, Click It or Ticket is a grant. That would be a state grant through the
Okay.
Governor's Highway Safety Bureau,
Yeah.
which is basically, it's federal traffic money given to the state, and then the state redistributes it. So it's called Click It or Ticket, but that is, ranges for things from, sometimes it's overtime, like during the holiday season, they'll have OUI patrols. When they're doing campaigns to increase seatbelt use, they'll pay for officers to go out and basically do enforcement on those things. It also will pay for things like if they want to cut down on speed, you can buy radar detectors, things like that. So Click It or Ticket, bulletproof vest is basically every officer's outfitted with a vest. E911 is state money that's paid off a service fee on people's cell phones. I don't know that I'd call it a grant per se, but it works similarly in the sense it gives money, but that money is used in basically, we run the Emergency Communications Center for not just the police, but for the fire department and the ambulance. So that can be a combination of both equipment and salaries. Like currently, we're upgrading to next generation 911. So every officer in the department has to go to 16 hours of training on that. That will pay for all that training, and it will pay for things like emergency medical dispatch used to be a flip chart. Somebody calls in, my husband has chest pains. You can't say, oh, I think that's a heart attack and ad lib it. You have to follow a set protocol, and you can't deviate from it. So it was a flip chart. You go to chest pain. You have to read that in order. Well, now they've come out and said, get rid of those. You have to have it on an iPad, and the iPad has to have this software on it. So that money would be used to pay for that stuff rather than town money. So that's basically it for current grants. We're always looking and applying related to the mental health. I recently tried to apply for a crisis intervention training that would have trained anybody in the department on crisis intervention training, which was a state grant. There was only one per county, and Brookline got it for Norfolk County. So, you know, we're always looking, and sometimes you're successul, sometimes you're not, so that can change year to year.
It's just not much,
It's not.
other than the town's own resources. Last question I had, we were talking with the town accountant a while back and asking about forfeitures and seizures, and that the department gets some of those but isn't obligated to share that information because of some state law or federal law?
Correct. There is a drug account, and basically you split the money. So if we were to make a drug arrest today and say seize $1,000, half of that goes to the district attorney's office, and then half would come to us. There is restrictions on that money, and then that money, you know, is used to, same thing, to combat drug stuff. That fluctuates.
Yeah, no, I'm not so much concerned about what's in it, but you know, there could be, if it was a massive amount of money, the fact that there's no sort of transparency really to how it, I don't know what the site, is it a state law?
It's federal.
It's a federal law. But does the power over that money vest with you, or do you, with the selectmen?
Well, it's an
or-
account maintained in the treasurer's office by Jim
Okay.
McAuliffe, and
Yeah.
basically, you know, I as chief, I mean, I'm only been chief 6 months, so I've never personally done it,
Yeah.
but I as chief would write a letter, and, you know, he maintains the account, and I would say, oh, we need to buy,
Other questions on the police budget?
Motion to approve contingent and non-contingent as presented?
Second?
Thanks, Maggie. Any other discussion? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Okay. Thank you, Chief King.
Thank you, everyone.
Before you go, Katie, do you want to come up to the table? We're going to transition into talking about the Board of Selectmen sponsored articles. And one of the articles that we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight is the fundamental speed limit article, because David wants to talk to us about that, and he unfortunately can't be here tonight due to a work commitment. But since you're here, instead of bringing you back later, are you familiar with the article, and do you want to weigh in on it at all?
I'm familiar. I'm more than happy to stay and answer any questions or what have you. You know, I did speak previously at a selectmen's meeting about it.
Okay.
But I'm very familiar with it, yes.
All right. Well, so what, as chief of police, what is your opinion on the speed limit article?
You know, I will say this, I think it's well-intentioned, the law. I think a lot of residents want it. You know, I don't speak against it. I have some reservations because I think it will put a significant burden on the police department, but as much as I have reservations, I still support it.
Okay.
We
do you wanna
voted to support it. Tom.
We did.
Yeah, David actually happened to be out sick that night, so it was just Tom and I who had the discussion, but I think David supports it, but.
I think we all do,
We all
yeah.
support it.
I think
yeah.
we all agree that there's a tremendous advantage in stopping distance going from 30 to 25. I was amazed at the amount of feet that you pick up in terms of, I forget the exact number, but it's huge. The problem is enforcement, the cost of enforcement. And like I said at the selectmen's meeting, people tend to drive on a road the way the road's designed. If they feel comfortable going at a speed, they're going to tend, unless they're staring at the speedometer all the time, they're going to tend to go that speed. So if you really wanted to work without adding 100 more police officers, the roadways have to be designed to make it comfortable to do 25 miles an hour on those roads by traffic calming somehow. And there's more cost there. But you know, there is no question that it could be beneficial if it works.
The background of it is it came to us as a request from the East Milton Neighborhood Association, and they asked us if we would submit an article for that, and that's what we had some discussion about. And that's a neighborhood that does get a lot of traffic. Not that there aren't others, there are plenty of neighborhoods that get a lot of traffic complaints, but given the proximity of the houses in that area, there's just a lot of and a lot of people are trying to avoid Granite Ave and cutting down some of the side streets, so that they do see an awful lot of traffic in the neighborhood and people speeding. And the thinking was,
where if the speed limit is 30 or 35 in an area, it might be hard to, or let's say 30, it might be hard to ticket somebody who's going 35, 37. How seriously would that get taken in court when the person shows up in court? If it's 25 and it's a 37 mile an hour that someone's ticketed going, then that's a big enough difference that it might be taken a little more seriously. And we also talked about it would be good if all the surrounding towns all went to the same speed limit, so you're not, as the chief pointed out, so you're not coming from Quincy where it's one speed limit into Milton where it's another, and out to Canton where it's something else. So hopefully.
Yeah, we would have to post at all the entrance points to the town that the fundamental speed limit is 25. So I don't know how many points you'd have to post that at, but there are quite a few entry points into Milton from Hyde Park and Quincy and Dorchester. And
I believe Boston has already adopted it.
They
have.
Correct.
They have.
We have a little bit of paperwork from the East Milton Neighborhood Association that we can send over to you to distribute, Lee Michael.
Okay. And we are going to discuss this again on March 8th when David is here, but if you had a question for Chief King, now is a good time. Do you want to ask Betty?
Is that enforceable for like Randolph Avenue, which is a state highway, or Truman Highway? It's just the Milton streets.
Well, it's Milton streets, but only ones that aren't posted otherwise. So it wouldn't apply to a state road like Randolph Ave.
What about Brook Road?
But that would, where the town has the option to exclude it. So in other words, they would adopt 25, except if posted otherwise. So if Milton chose to leave Brook Road posted 30, it would be 30.
And the warrant, I'm sorry, the article makes it up to the Board of Selectmen to determine that.
Okay. Because I do think it will slow people down, because I think generally the speed limit tends to be, the natural speed limit, shall I say, tends to be like 10 miles higher than the posted speed limit. Because I think when I drive on Brook Road, like, heading towards East Milton, through that, I think people are generally driving 40 miles an hour. If I drive 30, I have a perception behind me. You really feel like you're going really slow, but that is the posted speed limit. But I think if, in the effort to slow everybody down, because I think people are driving too fast, I think that's a good idea.
Maggie?
I just have one quick comment. How do you determine in thickly settled areas? Who determines that? The Board of Selectmen or the police chief?
There's
How
a
do you
design.
determine that?
It's when the houses were within so many feet of one another,
Okay.
because so much.
There's a legal definition that has to do with the density, and the distance between houses and stuff, but that's defined on a state level.
Yes.
Maybe they can bring this when they come, but is there data that show a 16% reduction in accidents or things of that nature with a 16% reduction in the speed limit?
We can, I don't know, because it's so new, but we can look into that and see if
Yeah, I
there's
don't know
any.
if there's any, there's definitely statistics on stopping distance.
Yeah,
that-
but, I mean, if there's not accidents happening to 5 mile, I live in East Milton, and it's the the stop signs that people run at 25 or 30 miles an hour that are by far the bigger problem than somebody driving 32 instead of 25. And,
There isn't data specific to 30 reducing 25 and reduction in accidents, because the law's so new. The only place that's really adopted is cities because of the nature of their form of government. They can go through the city council and adopt it quicker than towns have been able to. And it's just so new, but prior to that, you couldn't lower it below 30, so it was never done, so there's really not data on it. But I agree, with East Milton, I don't know what street you're on, but that, the problem down there is people do these rolling stops through the stop signs and stuff like that.
I'm in Belcher, and
Okay,
there's
yeah.
a yellow line down the middle of it, so people think it's a major road.
Right.
And they really won't, so. Take that up with the DPW when they repave it.
Mark?
Yeah, just one question, I mean, if this was to be implemented, and you pointed out that, potentially there's a burden on the police department to enforce that, is there technology available where there could be some sort of like automated enforcement on certain troubled roads, or?
It's not legal in the state.
You can't issue like citations or anything based on cameras or laser, and not in Massachusetts. You do see that in the States, you see it in Florida, you see it in Washington DC. It's not legal in Massachusetts, so beyond, a warning type system, the radars, we have a board that we tow with a trailer, and the town's invested in some that can be hung on poles, that are gonna flash, speed limit 25, you're going 33. But other than warning, the only way to enforce it is to have an officer on that street. There's no, technology allowed in Massachusetts. Technology exists, but it's not legal in the state.
Anything else for Chief King? Thanks so much for coming in tonight. I really
Michael,
appreciate
can I just mention, the Traffic Commission article, the chief already knows this, but we've asked you to defer that until March 8th. I don't, if anyone has any questions, we could maybe have a preliminary conversation about it tonight, but we want to sit, the town administrator and I wanted to sit down with Chief King. He had some suggestions beyond what we had been thinking about for that article that probably makes sense to explore. It would include a discussion with the DPW as well, so we need a little more time to do that, and then come back to you on the 8th for that one.
Okay. Do you want to say anything now, or are you comfortable coming back then? Or?
I can come back whenever. That's no
Okay.
problem.
Or you can submit writing, of course, too. All right. Thank you very much, Katie. All right, thanks so
Thank you.
much, Chief.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. So we're going to shift in just a second to talk about some other Board of Selectmen sponsored articles. I just wanted to reference the reserve fund transfer request that we got from the Board of Selectmen. Chair Conlon is working on some backup on that calculation, and she'll be getting that to us, so we're not going to discuss that tonight. Just wanted folks to know that she was working on that. And my recommendation was going to be, we talk about the master plan appropriation, then the wharf, then to Adam Street, given the people that we have that are going to help you speak on those topics, and that then we can proceed from there on whatever your pleasure is, Chair Conlon. Are you okay with starting with master plan? Or?
That makes perfect sense, and could we ask Cheryl Tugayas to
Yes.
join us at the table, chair of the master plan committee?
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Cheryl. Nice to see you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Lee Michael, and members.
Cheryl Tagayas is an elected member of the Planning Board and a former member of this committee.
Indeed, and the Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
The title's getting long. So you want to talk to us about this article we have up on the board for the appropriation for the master plan implementation?
Yes. Well, our committee is composed of 5 individuals. We've been meeting for the last year monthly, trying to take what is a lengthy document and figure out how to make it a living and actionable document. So one of the things that, or a couple of the things that have come up that would be recommendations coming out of the committee would entail hiring a consultant. So it might be some work on related to traffic. In particular, we're looking at the wharf, which we can get to. But our recommendation is to think about, to move the master plan forward, is really to have an annual appropriation to make steps. So parts of the recommendations in the master plan had to do with further study, in particular the business districts, for example. New zoning. The planning board itself has been fairly busy with just with applications and hasn't had a lot of time to address zoning itself. So we're responding to citizen petition and otherwise on zoning, but there is interest in advancing some new zoning. So the 50,000 that has been requested, there are a couple of thoughts about where it could be used, but it is not earmarked to one specific thing, because we'd like to have some flexibility in being able to use it to the in the areas which seem the most pressing in the coming year.
And I think that the version of the article that we got actually doesn't have a dollar figure associated
Okay.
with it.
All right.
But it sounds
So
like
we've
the
talked
dollar
about an
figure is
amount.
50,000.
Well, the planning board we voted to request $50,000, so.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that's been conveyed, other than possibly through the free cash number when we submit, or items
It's
that.
on our list
it's
for
on our
free
list.
cash.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I don't know if it's fair to ask you about the planning board budget, given your role and that we weren't going to talk about that till the first, but there are some dollars in the planning board budget that haven't been in it in the past. Is any of that you know of earmarked for master plan implementation?
Well, we haven't had a lengthy discussion about it, but in our discussions, we've talked about that being, for example, this current fiscal year, there was an amount in the budget sort of earmarked for codification of the zoning code. So, but that zoning code that's online is not up to date with all of the amendments that have been made through the years. So it's actually very difficult and cumbersome for somebody coming into town to to look online at the zoning code and see what they're able to do with the property. So the zoning codification was actually done in-house by our assistant town planner. So that's the type of thing that we're looking at. So perhaps a peer review or assistance with actually writing zoning or a match to a grant. So it's things that are perhaps related to the master plan, but it could be something that's more specific to things that are coming up on the agenda of the planning board through applications.
So the $50,000 that you would be requesting under this article is in addition to the monies that are in the
Correct.
planning board budget. And do you anticipate at this time that that 50,000 is the number that you'd like to use annually going forward for a while, or is that something you want to reevaluate next year?
I think we'll continue to evaluate it. One of the ways we arrived at it this year is we did solicit some proposals for zoning, well, really sort of urban design and planning and zoning for the Milton Village Business District and the Milton Landing. And that came to an amount of about $35,000. So we felt as if we wanted to tackle East Milton Square, it's a little larger district, it has a few other complexities, so that might be something where it might be more than $35,000. We've also had a lot of conversations about traffic and traffic studies and whether there's a town-wide study, traffic study that could be done. It would be more than $50,000. So these are the things that we haven't come out specifically with a recommendation on the traffic yet, but it is something I think that we'd like to think about in the coming fiscal year, being able to make a recommendation for some kind of study.
Steve?
So, Cheryl, as a free cash item, it disappears next year unless there's a appropriation for it. So is this something that if the money did disappear, that the 50,000 would be, put to good use, or would it get you partway into something that you're not able to finish?
I think it could get us, certainly, right now, what we're focused, our recommendation is in, like I said, the Milton Village and the Milton Landing, and that money would definitely cover the work that we're looking to do there. And then probably assist with some other pieces. If it weren't available then the following year, we probably would have to scale back the next thing that we'd recommend doing. Or maybe look for partial implementation of, let's say there's a certain part of one of the things about the town-wide traffic study, I mean, you heard before about people you've talked about, cut-through traffic, and traffic is one of the, I think, quality of life issues that is most talked about. And when we're looking at some of our underutilized property or our opportunities for growth in certain places, traffic is one of the largest issues. So we think that if we target some of our analysis at development, we also are going to have to look at traffic as a part of it. So it doesn't have to be town-wide, so maybe we can look at doing it in sections, maybe a couple of years at a time, if the monies are not available.
So you can't speak for the board, but might this appropriately be funded long-term as a contingent budget item?
Well,
You want it to repeat, you want it to continue, and that would be how to introduce it, rather than one and possibly done.
If I can jump, we did
Sure.
talk at the Master Plan Implementation Committee that the committee has a 10-year life, and the thinking among the committee has been like the first couple of years are really getting started, figuring out what are the priorities, what's the low-hanging fruit, what should we be focused on for the next couple of years. So the needs could change going forward. It might be that in year 3, we're looking for $150,000. It might be that in year 4, we're back to $20,000. It just depends on what's going on at any given time. So we kind of viewed that amount fluctuating.
right.
Fluctuating and grabbing it out of free cash when it's available, or fluctuating and it's a budget appropriation?
Well, I mean, I guess if it gets built into a contingent budget is 50,000, then maybe in a future year, the rest of it would have to be budgeted out of free cash in any given year. So there's probably a few different ways you could approach that. We didn't really have much of a discussion about contingent versus non-contingent, either at I don't think we did at our meeting,
Yeah, no.
or at the master plan, and I don't know if the planning board did.
No. The planning board conversation was focused on having opportunity to move the master plan forward, needing some funds at our disposal to be able to make the most of that.
And making sure you can keep doing it.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right. And we didn't, at the planning board, we didn't discuss which pot, that this would come from necessarily, except with we followed the recommendation that the Board of Selectmen, I think, had made towards that.
What was that recommendation?
Well, in this particular case, to have this come from free cash.
Oh, right. I thought you were referring to where it would go, because that was my follow-up question. Is it your intention for this money to be allocated to and spent by the planning board? Because this entity doesn't have a bank account that I'm aware of.
It would have to be jointly approved by the Board of Selectmen and the planning board.
Yeah, that's what we wrote into the article.
Okay. Expended with the approval of the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board. Okay, but all right, so it would be accounted for on the free cash schedule and wouldn't necessarily show up in any specific budget?
It could be. I mean, your idea about a contingent budget is probably worth it.
Yeah, I would think
pursuing.
you would actually put it in the budget of there's no reason why you couldn't have a budget for the implementation committee.
I thought there was some opposition to that on the planning board. No, I could be misremembering.
No, I think the planning board wanted to be clear about having an approval role in the use of the fund. So once it's determined what the recommendation is, it would be discussed both at the Board of Selectmen and the planning board level. And it wouldn't be something where the master plan implementation committee itself was authorizing it independently.
Okay.
So it easily could then go in a line item for the implementation committee with the provision that any expenditures out of it by the selectmen and the.
It could, or I guess alternatively, it could go into the planning board's budget and we'd still have the approval by both boards, but that would be where it was housed.
Yeah.
Or the selectmen's budget, but the master plan is really kind of under we have an appointee on the committee as the planning board does, but it's really, the master plan's more under the planning board than it is anybody else.
Might be a little more transparency if it's its own line item.
The line item in the planning board budget?
Yeah, no, I think there was some thought on the planning board that having its own line item would be more transparent, as you say, Tom. And that if there were some other need in the planning board, it wouldn't be something that would be available, to be used for another purpose, for example.
So then maybe make it a line item in the planning board and fund it potentially with free cash for the next fiscal year, and then perhaps in the future it could become either under a contingent budget or whenever could become a reoccurring at some point on that same line item in the planning board. But for now, it seems like if we were to make an appropriation, and I recommend that we not vote this tonight because we need to look at the whole free cash request list. But when we do, it sounds like we should create a new line in the planning board budget for master plan implementation and put the money there.
Sound reasonable?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you could always recommend or put it forward as a contingent, as part of the contingent budget, and Mr. Dennehy is looking at the contingent budget with some of the department heads and some
As
of his
an
team.
operating expense, you mean?
Yeah, so along the idea that Steve mentioned, that maybe in some future year you might have to appropriate a supplemental amount of free cash if there is free cash. But, in other words, we've submitted the article and put in what the request is, and we'd like both boards to sign off on it. We think $50,000 is the number for next year, but between the town administrator and the warrant committee, it may be that you think some of it should go into the contingent budget. So I don't think any of us are opposed to that. Our discussion was around free cash.
Right. One of the things I do want to mention, though, in terms of being in the planning board budget, we have talked a lot about the planning board does take a lead in the implementation. There's goals, and then there's specific strategies, and then within those strategies there's lead entity that's responsible. The planning board is not the lead entity for all of the implementation goals. Some of them are under the town administrator, the Board of Selectmen, some are under the Parks Department, and so forth. So our committee's been reaching out to the various responsible parties to make sure that they're aware of it, to have it be included in their planning. So it may be that one of those departments actually would like to tap into these funds as well to help with the implementation that they're responsible for. So I think that's where sort of the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board jointly, the idea of it being a joint recommendation or approval.
Yeah.
So whether that impacts whether you think it still should be in the planning board budget as a line item or not, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Maybe I can follow up with Michael and Amy after this meeting and talk to them about the logistics of adding a new table into the warrant and appropriating money to the entity called the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Because one of the other unintended consequences that I can foresee is that I can't remember any other budgets that require two different boards to approve the expenditure from that budget. So right now, everything else under the planning board is expendable by the planning board, right? It doesn't require Board of Selectmen approval. So if we were to add a line and this article has this contingency in it that expending the money also requires Board of Selectmen approval, that might create a strange conflict.
Yeah, I guess the reason is just because, as Cheryl mentioned, this, there are some roles for the park commissioners and the library trustees under the master plan, but most of it is planning board or either the town administrator or the Board of Selectmen. So
Right.
that's where an awful lot of it falls, is between those two elected boards. So that's why, that was the reason. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Lee, Michael.
So if we talk to town attorney and Mr. Flynn and Mr. Dennehy and Amy, and they think that it would be best to create a new table and allocate the funds to the entity described in the article, would you have any concerns with that?
I would.
Okay,
No?
great. Any other questions for, yep, go ahead.
I was just wondering, we've heard from the police department and we've heard about parking and traffic and speed limits. And the fact that you're going to fund a traffic study. I mean, wouldn't it be better, it sounds like we're putting the cart before the horse. Wouldn't it be better to have this kind of information when everyone's trying to grapple with positions that they want to fill and how they're going to accomplish the goals that they've set up?
There's the traffic study that the planning, or the master plan implementation committee is discussing is a little bit different than some of the enforcement. It really has to do with if we're going to do some new development, or we're going to rezone or adjust our business districts to mixed use, for example, or we have some sites which are the pre-existing non-conforming, if we're going to try and have something happen on those, what impact would the new zoning have on traffic? So it's not about, you put a limited time frame for a one-way street, for example. That's not the sort of thing that we're looking at. The other thing that we've talked about, and we haven't made a recommendation yet, it's just something we're still discussing. We've had a couple of people with expertise come in and speak to the committee. So there's no proposal at the moment for a study. But one of the things we wanted to understand is, are other towns looking at a town-wide traffic analysis? And there is software, and towns are looking at it, so that you look at it and you can say, if I change something on these streets, it'll do an analysis to show you how that impacts other streets. So that is something we wanted to learn more about, and we think, we would obviously need to engage other people in the discussion, the DPW and the police department, et cetera. But first, what we're trying to do is collect the information about what's available and what other towns are doing. So that's definitely something I think we'd like to move forward with a recommendation in the next year, but we don't have one at the moment.
And so, on that vein, we are developing very rapidly in this town. And again, it'd be nice if we had that kind of information when people come before us about putting new developments in. It's happening now. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I agreed. I think it's something that we'll continue to discuss at our committee and hopefully come forward with a recommendation, sooner rather than later, in terms of whether we can get something done for this allocation. There are things that can be done. There's a range, in terms of capability, what the costs are. So that's why we wanted to be sure that we do our homework first before we come forth with a specific recommendation on that.
Can we put forward Brian's good idea about the fund?
Right, so there's some towns, and apparently the legality of it is something still to be analyzed, but some towns have mitigation funds. So if a project, a large enough project is deemed to have an adverse impact, then the approvals can require a contribution into a mitigation fund. And that mitigation fund could be used to either fund further traffic studies or fund actual mitigation measures. And it could be something where more than one project is pooled into this fund, so you're drawing from, your resources could be larger because you're drawing from more than one project. So that's something that we're looking into.
Yeah. Brian Furs, of the chair of the planning board, put that forward, and Mr. Dennehy's looking into accounting for that.
Well, I think we looked at one of those developer agreements the other night that had a mitigation in it. It's pretty substantial mitigation for the development, and I suspect it was probably for that very reason.
Probably.
Maggie?
No, I just think that's a good idea. It's too bad you just couldn't make even all of the developments that are coming before us, incorporate that into their agreement where they're going to be, giving a little contribution or X amount of dollars on any new development in the town gets into that fund. Part of the cost of doing, business in Milton. I don't know if that's feasible, but just an idea.
It's something that was just recently brought up by Mr. Furs at the planning board, so there was interest at the planning board in having further conversation about that, so stay tuned.
Okay.
Any other questions on the master plan implementation appropriation? Great, well, we'll take this up again when we talk about free cash.
Okay.
Want to talk about the wharf article then?
Yes, and we need the town planning director and Mr. Corcoran.
Can we make some room at the table, maybe?
I have 11, so Julia, you'll have to get one tomorrow.
She doesn't like us to refer to her during the meeting. So who wants to go first? Ned, did you have some opening comments?
I've just introduced myself, Ned Corcoran. I am an attorney in Quincy. I do a lot of work for real estate developers here in Milton, and I've been hired by the Wharf Street Condominium Association to represent them in their negotiations with the town with respect to the potential grant of an easement, or renewal of a grant of an easement over a portion of their property down at Milton Landing.
Tom and I should probably, if you're...
And they are generally supportive of the approach that's being taken.
And this is put forward by our board, but again, it relates to a lot of what the Master Plan Implementation Committee's been working on, and it would give us, we did forward some information to the Warrant Committee, hopefully everybody received that. There were 3 easements that were obtained by the town once the 88 Wharf condominium building was built, and there were 2 that were perpetual. There was a 3rd one that Bill will show you on the map. That was only for, I think, a 12-year period. We extended it last June for 1 year, and the Condominium Association has really expressed some interest in entering into this, perpetuating this easement agreement with us, because they're very interested in seeing more waterfront activity use. And that's something that our board started talking about a couple of years ago when the yacht club's lease expired with the park commissioners, and we decided to take a little time, see what might possibly be done with the Swift Hat Shop building and revitalizing the area in general. Unfortunately, the Master Plan Implementation Committee offered to step up and take over the lead of the discussions with the stakeholders, and Cheryl Tugayas, who's our chair on the Implementation Committee, has been really very involved in that and moved the process along quite a bit. So we're now at a point where we're talking with the Condominium Association about taking a permanent easement, and Cheryl and Bill will have some more information to share with you.
Yep. You have 2 pictures, one's in color, one's in black and white.
The color actually shows you, the numbers shows you the different pieces, so you'll know where we're looking. We're looking at F10-4. F10-4 is a lot that is owned by 88 Wharf. It is there for the benefit of their parking numbers, and it also gave them a bonus of extra units in the building for their special permit. Presently, we use that land under easements 1 and 2 to access the waterfront. The bottom of the colored page shows an additional lot. You'll hear people refer to Captain's Landing. That's Captain's Landing. That is a parcel of land that the town was given in 1917 for the town beach.
Ooh, nice.
And in 1918, they figured that they couldn't swim there because of pollution. So it's been polluted for a while. We are getting better. The easements go with, I'll mix up 1 and 2, but they're pretty much the same. They allow us to traverse across that parcel of land. 1, to get to Captain's Landing, 2, to get to the waterfront and be able to use the parking that is there for the district. Easement 3 is the one that was there for a certain period of time, and it was supposed to be renewed. We have a 1-year extension with the condo association while we figure out next steps. This is the next step. If we take the rest of the property that is not included in easement 1 and 2, that is the article. The idea is to be able to access the waterfront, be able to use it for different purposes.
Bill, you said take the property, but you meant accept an easement.
Accept the easement.
Yep.
Take the easement, not the property.
Yep. Is there any controvery here that I'm missing?
No,
Who's opposed
it's
to
really
this?
not controversy. No, I mean,
No, right?
we've had, Cheryl can, we got all the stakeholders into the room, and for the benefit of the committee, the stakeholders are the yacht club, the Friends of the Milton crew, which is not only the high school crew team, but the master's crew. And they've been around for a few years now and really had quite an expanding program, and the high school has really had a lot of kids participate. It's been a great thing for the high school. So the yacht club, the crew, the 88 Wharf Street Condo Association, the farmers market. Have I left anybody out?
And even the Swift Hat.
The Swift Hat.
And, Mr. King's representative.
Yes. So all of those parties would like to work together to try to get a more permanent home for, including a dock for the Friends of the crew, mainly the high school crew team and the masters, and still have the yacht club, which already has existing. It's not a dock, but, well, they have docks, but there's also a very unique way of launching the boats into the water. I forget what they call it. But accommodate all the interests of all the different stakeholders there. The condo association has expressed to us, and prior to Mr. Corcoran being involved, we were dealing directly with one of the members of the condo association, who I think is also a member of the yacht club. And they've been at a lot of the master plan committee meetings. We did a site walk back in August. And we've had pretty regular discussions at the implementation committee meeting. So everyone has really been on board with the concept of trying to bring the crew into the area more and increase just more pedestrian usage, and residents of the town just coming down and using the wharf. And some people don't even know that it's a resource that's there for them.
And this would really be a first step kind of in that process.
Yes.
It's really interesting in that 100 years ago, the town was doing the same thing. They were trying to find a way to make better use of the waterfront. What should that be? So each year, there were articles in the warrants back in 1916, 17, 18, going right through. So it's kind of interesting, 100 years later, we're still looking at some of the same things.
One of the reasons that I thought it was a good opportunity for the master plan committee, I'll shorten it, is that the master plan itself has a recommendation to increase access to the Neponset River for recreational purposes, and also to look at the business districts and providing zoning which would allow for a mixed use kind of in the districts. Right now, our business districts pretty much only allow the businesses, There is an overlay that allowed for 88 Wharf to be a mixed-use building, but it only applies to 2-acre lots and larger. Most of our lots are much smaller than 2 acres. So we have a lot of different users here who have a sort of interesting mix of uses already. So we can make this district better, and we felt as if before things get locked in terms of uses, we should take the opportunity to see if there's some other shared uses we can have here. Because we have the farmer's market, and we have, with the farmer's market, the library has done a bit of programming on the same day. It does bring kids to the waterfront, so we've talked about, is there a seasonal rental of kayaks or bikes, because you can get on the bike trail here. Is there a seasonal kind of retail that might have ice cream or something, again, which could take advantage of these mix of uses? Is there a shared parking that could be accommodated here, which is where the town owns some property and has access to parking, which could maybe help some of the other businesses in the district. So this is where, when I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a larger study. So we've looked at how to fund that, whether it could come from the planning board's budget in part. There's that $15,000 line item that's been in the budget that I mentioned. Whether it could come in part of a planning budget going forward, would come in this, if what I had suggested also could come in the free cash in the coming fiscal year. It's also been recommended that we look for some assistance from the Mass Area Planning Council. They have technical assistance where they do look for a matching grant. So right now we're in consideration for that, getting closer and closer on that, where we're looking at some contribution from the town, where the MAPC would take the leadership role in the study, and work with us and with the stakeholders in terms of what our goals are. So Bill put in that application. Bill, so if you want to just give a little update on that. You're still working on it.
I wish I could. They're waiting to hear back from us what we might want to put in for a match. With it, they're ready to go. So we have to find or think of a match for that. So that's planning board.
It seems like there's a lot that we could do with this property,
Yeah.
but the article itself really only allows us to accept the easement and doesn't commit the town financially to anything beyond what we're doing today. Is that correct?
That's right.
Just want to give you the background
Yeah, right,
context
and
for it.
that's helpful. I just wanted everybody to know that we're not committing the town to anything financial at this point.
It's an authorization, so
Yep,
you're correct.
to accept. Mr. Corcoran, is there anything you wanted to add from your client, or?
No, my client is happy to cooperate.
Not going against his will,
No,
or her?
there are details to work out in the final grant of the easement, but we're certainly
Okay.
willing to cooperate with the town in making the easement opportunity available.
Can I ask a question about grammar at the end of this article? The last line of this article, unfortunately, just has "and to act on anything related thereto" stuck onto it. No semicolon. It doesn't associate with any previous sentence. I don't think that that's what we want it to do in the recommendation.
It was
That's
written by
usually in
Mr.
the article.
Flynn,
Yeah,
so-
that's just in the article, so that if there were anything else that you wanted to, that was related to this, that
Okay.
needed to get worked out through the recommendation, so you wouldn't need to mirror that language in the recommendation if that's what you meant, but it's, the reason it's in the article is in case there's something that grows out of the discussions
Right.
here
Should
that would be
something else-
relevant, that we would
Should we
want
come
to
up
add.
with something else that we want to add in or take out?
So if we're not going to make any other changes to the article, we don't need that last line? Is that what you're
Not in the
recommending?
recommendation.
That is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, in lieu of that line, if you wanted to make a change, an additional recommendation, could, but yeah, if you're not,
Your
if
recommendation
all
would be
you're
minus that
recommending is just this, then yeah, you wouldn't.
Okay. Well, then, I'll ask the committee, are you ready to vote on this article? And if so, I have a suggested recommendation on the screen which approves it as is. Steve has a question.
Any impact on the tax levy by this being a permanent easement? Does that reduce the square footage of taxable property? Is there an impact that way?
It probably, well, I guess it
don't know the
impacts
answer.
value, but that's more of an assessor question. But an easement typically does have some impact on value.
But the ownership
Probably
doesn't
We
change.
can follow up on that question, Steve. We don't have the answer of
Yeah.
I just have a question.
Yep.
So the ownership is the Milton Landing condominium, and we're granting them the easement for everything,
We're
They're granting
accepting.
us-
accepting it.
Yeah.
So, I just, it's such a beautiful area, and I agree, we want to do the best as far as letting everyone participate. It's just a shame we weren't able to do something as far as where we have such limited commercial growth and get some tax money in down there. I have no idea, but just like you said, is it taking away from the taxpayers? I don't know, but there could be so many other
They'll be
things.
selling ice cream
perhaps.
cones.
I would guess that if there was an impact, it would be minimal because the ownership is not changing and the land still stays the same, and it's going to be used for similar impact.
Yes, and I think also, because the ownership remains with the condominium association, it doesn't affect or diminish, by giving up the easement, they don't reduce the value of the remainder of their property. So holding on to the fee and the land, the title to the land, and the parking allocation that goes with it supports the bonuses that were granted for the size of the condominium development itself. So I think that, you know, any diminution in tax value would be de minimis at best. I think it's very minor.
We've had a very similar easement there for the last
Right.
umpteen years as the building was built.
This would make it permanent.
Where,
2002.
right, if you look back at the picture, the amount of area that is outside of easement 3 is extremely small.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you look at it in color, it's the hill. So
Just covering all the bases.
Anything else?
No?
Motion to approve the recommendation as written.
Second.
Thanks, Jonathan. Any discussion? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Ned. Anything else for you? Oh, you're going to talk about 2 Adams. Bye, Cheryl. All right, so you want to move to 2 Adams now?
So I do have some pretty pictures. I didn't print enough of them, but I have a few. Pass those along.
Let's give our Sharon one.
When do I move in?
I think we're done shuffling. Do you want to open, Ned?
Sure, so, again, Ned Corcoran, and in 2006, 7, and 8, I permitted this building, among other things, at the extra space property location at 2 Adams Street, down in the village. It's on the other side of the railroad tracks from the property we were just discussing. Right now is the big storage building, and there are 2 older mill buildings there that were converted to condominiums as part of a special permit. It's the other property that was part of this overlay district that was created by the town about 10 years ago in the zone. This building was fully permitted in 2008. We received a building permit in early 2009. We had a groundbreaking for this building in the winter of 2009, and then the economy crashed. It didn't get built. Building, and the idea of building it went away. The building permit was extended over a number of years until a year and a half ago, and then that lapsed. There was legislative authorization for the town to grant a liquor license to a restaurant that would have the first floor. That legislation expired by its terms. And so everything kind of went dead. This building is designed to butt up against Adams Street. There are 2 levels of parking below that go down into the grade of the parking area down by the tracks. There's a restaurant, retail on the first floor, and there were 14 condominium units above. I have a client who has now, the client and I have convinced Extra Space Storage that they really should think about putting the building back in front of their storage building. They were somewhat loath to do that, and they are in the final negotiations of the acquisition of the rights to redevelop this building. As part of that development and as part of the state and local permits, one of the permits that we secured was a variance and license under Chapter 91 of the general laws. We secured one of, I think it's the second variance ever granted under Chapter 91. That dealt with the creation of condominiums in the two mill buildings, but one of the requirements of that license was that there be a restaurant in this new building. The building had to be permitted and it requires a restaurant. And so the goal is to rebuild something like this. Building upstairs, the makeup is going to be a little bit different. There'll be some affordable units provided. This client is really much more in the affordable world. But we do need, it does need a restaurant, and the restaurant will need a liquor license. So the purpose of this article is a home rule petition, to petition the legislature to allow the selectmen to grant a liquor license to a restaurant to be, that would be, come in here into this building once it's developed. We expect to, once we close on the purchase and sale agreement, I expect to be before the planning board and back before the state, the DEP and DCR, probably late spring to start the re-permitting process, and hopefully be through that, having gone through it once completely, be through that by the end of this calendar year, and then a groundbreaking sometime in 2018. And so really the purpose is to ask the town meeting to approve the home rule petition so that we can provide the opportunity for a liquor license. And, you know, it's one of the things that I've known, and I've argued it on the floor of town meeting and other opportunities, it takes, you know, these development opportunities take a long time to sort of percolate through. And, you know, when you think about a liquor license process, it's really 18 months to 2 years from start to finish, and you've got to have the opportunity to get there while all of the other activity is happening. So that's the background, that's the purpose.
And when this building was originally permitted, it did have a liquor license associated with it?
It had the authorization to acquire.
Okay.
The town, there was legislation granted, approved in 2010, I think. I don't have that with me. Authorized the liquor license. That bill was sunsetted at 4 years. If the license wasn't secured within
Right.
4 years, then the authorization went away. It's the only liquor license authorization that's been granted to the town that had that sunset provision in it. Navarra didn't have it, Abbey Park didn't have it, Steel and Rye didn't have it. For some reason, this one came attached with a 4-year window. So it lapsed in 2014. We have to reapply and go back through the process, filing with the legislature.
Questions? Yes, Steve?
Does the Chapter 91 license void also, because it stays alive?
Well, Chapter 91, I do have to revisit it. The license speaks to the development of the condominium units in the two old mill buildings. There's the old brick mill and the old wood mill. They were part of the originally part of the Baker chocolate process. I could teach a law school class on the whole development of this property, but those buildings were historic. The fact that they were historic gave me the ability to seek a variance under Chapter 91. They are two buildings, mill buildings, founded in the river. The river actually sluices underneath and powered the mills upstairs. Those were converted to condominiums. They're beautiful condominium units, and they were fully developed. They're owned by Extra Space and are rented. They've never been sold as units. One of the things that happened in '09 when the market crashed is that you couldn't find a lender to be the first lender in to a small condominium association. So Jeff Cruikshank from town was going to buy 2 units. He was going to pay cash for one and finance the other one, and his bank wouldn't do it. And they couldn't get bank financing to buy those units. So ultimately, Extra Space held on to them and leases them. But the condition of the ability to put what they call facilities of private tenancy in buildings that are founded within tidelands, flowed tidelands of the Commonwealth. The river is tidal up to the dam. It's high tide and low, and you see the boats sitting in the mud, and then you see them otherwise. But it's tidal, and Chapter 91 protects the public's right of access to tidal waterfront. And so to vary that rule, the historic preservation of those 2 buildings was critical. And a component of that arguably required us to build this building. It's clear that we had to permit the building. Condominiums were developed, and they're not going away. DEP's not going to pull the authorization. But I do have to revisit with DEP. I may have to revisit the size of the restaurant. The restaurant license says 135 seats. That may or may not be the right size of the restaurant going forward, and the developer will make those determinations. But it required 135 seat restaurant, 1,000 square feet of retail, and 1,000 square feet of riverine education space, which would have been a room behind the retail that originally was supposed to have been available to UMass Boston for its oceanography, riverine study, habitat, educational purposes. If UMass wasn't able to get there, it becomes available for public use. It can be operated and maintained by the restaurant. The restaurant can use it for functions when not otherwise scheduled. It's the way the license is written. But the license, at a minimum, the license required us to permit this building. And the plans for the license include the footprint of the building. The question is whether, and now I will go back to DEP with a plan to sort of bring that to closure, because we'll actually be producing the building, or something approximate to that.
Another question, as far as it goes through the planning board process, so many of these run into trouble at town meeting because there hasn't been a full public participation process. Has that already happened at this point, or is that gonna happen all over?
You have to go all the way back through it. The special permits that was granted by, so this building has, and this property has federal, state, and local permits. On the town level, there's special permit from the planning board, a variance from the Board of Appeals, approval from the Conservation Commission, and approval from the town's historic commission.
Right.
So I do have to go back, I have to re-permit that, but I think that, having been through it, I think that will be I know where all the pitfalls are, hopefully. But I think I can get it back through.
Are we too far ahead? Yeah, it may, the potential to make this look like asking the legislature to give a liquor license sort of just can say to some people that this is a done deal, and there hasn't been a vetting of it yet.
I guess the question, we went back through it before, legislature approved the authorization, and that was coming through in a parallel track to this development. Navarro was approved, at least came out of town meeting, and before that was fully baked, I think there was some discussion at town meeting on the Navarro one about having some sort of a moratorium on liquor licenses while we had a chance to study it, and there was discussion about the impact of a moratorium, and these things real estate development takes time.
Right. Let me boil it down. Will there be some public opportunity to get information about this before town meeting, so that the first thing that people hear about this project isn't that they're being asked to support a liquor license?
Yes, I fully expect that we'll be in preliminary discussions with the planning board and the selectmen about what's coming, what the plans are.
I think Steve's looking for a neighborhood meeting.
Yeah.
You know, it's just,
Yeah, we'll
no,
be in front of
not
the.
necessarily,
yeah.
but a hearing where people can come. And-
So if it comes before the planning board, those are
Yeah.
public, open, posted meetings, right?
And the neighborhood is, Milton Hill Neighborhood Association,
Mhm.
of which I'm a member, would meet with them. This is,
But Ned is right, I think most of these projects come to the planning board for special permit after the liquor license.
no, it comes at the same time.
The parallel. Yeah, they're kind of parallel, but the liquor license usually hits town meeting, well,
The permitting, yeah,
The authorization.
yeah.
I mean, it will take, if town meeting votes in May, to authorize the home rule petition, it won't get out of the legislature until sometime in 2018.
Right.
Then,
But if a parade of neighbors come in and say, this is the first I've heard of it, it will go down in flames at town meeting like they so often do.
yeah, I guess, I guess, I guess, yeah, this public process that we will engage in. No
Okay.
question.
Thank you.
I remember this proposal though, back in 2007, because it was gonna be a steakhouse. I remember you telling me that, yeah.
And
The
we can
restaurant was
commit,
gonna be-
I mean,
yeah.
we don't have David here tonight, but we can commit to asking Ned to come back in and brief us on it, because the affordable housing component here is gonna be really important.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ned, I think we have an opportunity to do more than what the 10% requirement for most
There
development
is no,
projects are.
and there's no
So-
requirement for affordable housing in this zoning overlay. There is no affordable housing at the Wharf Street condominiums.
But the client, your client is
And my
is
client in
looking
this
to do
case
affordable
is
housing
actually
here.
looking to do combination of workforce and affordable. They are in the affordable housing business. And so they're looking, rather than do, what was upstairs, 14 units of very high-end condominium, they're gonna do more of there'll be more units, and units that will be available for workforce and affordable. So they're looking on the 20 plus or minus range. They haven't gotten all the way there with their plans, but there was a payment that would have been due to the Affordable Housing Trust, the amount of $50,000. That was a negotiated payment that was done with the planning board during that process, but it's not a condition of, there is no affordable requirement as a condition of this zoning. This was the first zoning overlay that was approved by the town. Central Avenue zoning overlay came a year or two later. That has a 10% affordability requirement. And then that sort of set the bar for all of the development that's followed, all of the rezoning of property that's followed. Each one of those has a 10% affordability component.
But the affordable component to this is interesting to us, to the affordable housing trustees that Tom serves on, and to the planning board, because we're trying to really make some effort in that area to increase affordable housing. So this is something we're probably going to want to have Ned and his client come in at some point and give us more of an update as their plans get to be a little bit firmer.
Okay. Maggie had a question.
Oh, well, I was just gonna ask, is it a full liquor license or beer and wine? And
Full liquor
is there a difference in timeframe in obtaining one? No. And the affordable housing, I think that's great. There's no way that you could incorporate that in, so to make sure that the developer does do that?
I'm sorry?
You know, how you want the 10% affordable housing and that he's participating.
Well,
What happens if he changes his mind? Is he able to do so?
If he follows the zoning, he's not required to produce any affordable housing. These guys are going for, in fact, we met with Mike in December because they were starting the process of applying for some state funding and some state grants that are available for affordable housing purposes. And so their whole financing plan is reliant on a much more robust affordable housing component than just the 10%.
That answers the
required. It's
question, yeah.
25 to 50%. And there are credits available and financing available to him to go through that. And that's what he's begun the application. We briefed the town on that in December so that the town was aware that that application was coming and it was going to be filed on behalf of, in part on behalf of the town, it had to be a cooperating entity, so.
Thank you.
Yes, Mike?
No, I think it looks good to have all this additional affordable housing. We've got to be making progress towards a plan
Right.
that's going to help out. Has there been any look into the impact on the school enrollment of this?
No. We haven't
That might be a thing.
looked
that
at
would
it.
be-
I assume that would be something that these guys would be.
But it's only 20 units.
I went to a session back in, I don't know, 2010, where they told us whenever someone comes in with a developer, ask that question. So I'm just doing what I was taught.
Probably gonna get a lot of
Assume
seniors.
there would be some impact. How much that impact would be, you know, if you have 20 units and you've got families with some kids, yeah, they're gonna come in and they're gonna be in the school, so.
That'd be a
Right.
thing to put in.
It's going to depend on the number of units, the size of the units. If you have multiple smaller units, you're not getting
Right.
children. But we've asked that question, we're still waiting. Their architect is still playing with design.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for asking that question.
Does anybody else have any questions on this proposed article? No? Are we ready to vote at this time?
Motion to approve the recommendation as written.
I'll take Michael, sorry, Ben.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thanks, Ned.
Thank you, I
Have a good night.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chair Conlon, what would you like to do next? Good night, Bill, thank you.
Thanks, Nate. We'll reshuffle the chairs and we'll get everybody back to a microphone.
In a couple of weeks.
Okay.
I do have one more for Valentine, so you don't have to
We could do chapter 13 work hours or the solar credits. Capital Improvement Planning Committee.
Yeah, do you want to start with the solar credits?
Yeah, I can do the solar credit one.
Do I not have this? I have to scroll for a section.
There you are.
All right. On the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
This article is an ask to take the credits involved with solar panels that have been installed in this building that we're in tonight. It's about $400 a month. Take that money, put it into a revolving fund. Our Consolidated Facilities Director, Bill Ritchie, would then use that to upgrade the energy efficiency of this building. I think it's a great idea. Currently, that money does not go to Mr. Ritchie, but just back into the general fund. I think it would be a better served purpose to have him take that money and then turn it into future energy savings in this facility.
Specifically just for this facility? Can you use the money in other buildings?
I think originally it's for this building, but eventually, you know, he'll maximize the efficiency of this building from an energy perspective and be able to use it. And what would you say, Steve? 16 buildings in the town. But it's about $400 a month.
Steve?
I had the same question, in as much as you may want to do it in this part first, then you'd have to go back to town meeting to expand. So you could, by policy, just say we're gonna spend the money on this building until we're satisfied, but I think it should be any and all town buildings. That would make more sense.
Duly noted, yeah. It specifically talks about the improvements to the town office
You
building.
may just, you may add solar in another building and then have more. That could be an energy efficiency measure, the new fire station, they put solar panels on it or something else. So, limiting it like that seems like we'll probably be back to change it, and maybe we could set it up flexibly to start with.
Okay.
Well, we probably can't expand it now at this point, right?
From the amendment.
Well, what we could do, no, not under this article, but what we could do is reopen the warrant and revise it and then close the warrant again if we want, or submit a different article.
Mhm.
Except the friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment, yeah, that's what we're talking about.
In scope, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's going to expand the scope, and the town moderator may find it out of scope to apply to more than
Although,
one building.
Yeah, that's a question I think we want to talk with town, yeah, I think you're probably right, although sometimes if it's in print and the issue is, does the town have notice of it? So if the recommendation is in print, but I guess you still have a scope question if it's beyond really what the article
Yeah.
contemplated.
If that's town council,
Yeah, but we could, if we want, we could revisit it and either submit a new article or submit a revised article.
Okay.
We don't like the idea of placeholder articles. I know there's been some discussion of that at the planning board this year, and they've got a lot before them, and they've got some big projects. So that we're contemplating that there's going to be changes to at least one, maybe two of the major planning board articles. But, so we may have to reopen and close the warrant for a couple of these anyway.
I'm just trying to understand the grammar here on the last sentence. After the semicolon, to determine a limit on the total amount which may be expended from such fund during the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2017.
It's a revolving fund.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
but does
yeah.
it say that the town administrator determines the limit?
No, town meeting.
No,
Town meeting would.
So your recommendation will.
So our recommendation has to include an amount.
Yes, just like all the other revolving funds.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. So, but that's
But where the town administrator comes in is the consolidated facilities director wouldn't be able to spend it without the approval of the
Without
town
our-
administrator. But you would, town meeting with you,
If memory
based on
serves,
your
though,
recommendation, would set the amount that could be spent.
there's one article that sets all of those amounts, right? Or is there just
There's
one
one
that's?
article for all existing, I think it's a new revolving
Yeah.
fund, this would come from as a separate, and then would roll into,
So we would include it here?
Yeah.
And do you have a recommendation on what the limit would be? What are you generating in credits right now?
I don't have an exact number, but Bill Ritchie would have that.
Can you get it for us?
Yes, I certainly can, yeah.
Wasn't it approximately 400 a
It
month?
was approximately 400, yeah.
Does that fluctuate?
I'd say it would, yeah.
Well, I have solar panels and I have the same program on my house, and we get almost none in February, March.
No, I meant the value of the credits, when you
Yeah.
sell the credits.
Yeah, they're sold on a market,
Right.
Yeah.
which operates within a band.
Okay.
So there's, depending on what program the town is in, there's usually a floor and a ceiling on the band.
Okay.
I'll get the specifics for you.
Okay. Yeah, because I think there's a guideline as to what percentage of what your expected sort of income is for setting the withdrawal limit. So we would want to get a recommendation on that from you. So that
I'm
we
not sure
don't-
there is, for example.
Well, I think Amy might have an opinion on that.
Well, no, let me finish. We have forever had a revolving fund with respect to the senior center.
Yeah.
That thing has never generated a dime in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a revolving fund article. I believe we still have it.
We do, and we recently brought the limit that could be expended from it down because
But
we
it's, realistically, it's never gonna, unless you're gonna give it that thing a liquor license, it's never, ever gonna generate a dime of revenue.
But
So that's why I don't think there is a,
I think it can be too high for the Department of Revenue's liking, though.
yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, why don't we get some more specifics and get back to you on this on the 8th?
Okay.
Yep.
Does anybody else have
And I
any
guess
other
we could-
questions?
I mean, obviously, we don't have
on
one of our
this?
members here tonight, so we could have our own discussion about whether
Yeah.
we want to submit a different article that
Revise
would cover
article,
other buildings, now that you've raised that point.
Mhm.
We'd want to get David's input on that, too.
Do other people generally think it's a good idea to have this apply to more buildings? They might want a little more direction, yeah, in general. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions that you want them to get answers to on this article before they come back? Okay. So the limit. All right, what would you like to do next?
military compensation, we're going to defer
Yes,
until the, until the 8th.
Dave would like to be here for that discussion.
And we're going to send you some information. We haven't been able, we're pulling that together, but we do have some information from the HR director, as well as the firefighters who brought that article to us that they gave us. So we want to get all that copied and make sure that you have it. It's mainly about the practices in other communities.
Okay.
We have a housekeeping article relating to Chapter 13, Town Hall office hours.
Mhm.
Do you want to cover that one next?
Yes, please.
This one really is, it is a housekeeping article. What happened here was, back in 2012, it was collectively bargained with the unions that there would be a somewhat flexible work week, so that right now the employees don't work 9 to 5 each day. Town Hall closes early at 1:30 on Friday afternoons, I think, as you probably know. And the employees work longer hours Monday through Thursday, and then they work from 8 until 1:30 on Fridays. And that was collectively bargained a few years ago. It was, apparently, according to the former town administrator, it was the intent at the time to amend Chapter 13 to reflect the fact that had been negotiated with all of the unions, but that never happened. So this article really just seeks to correct that, to reflect what the current practice is. And it was brought to our attention by a reporter for the Milton Times that the town hall office hours were inconsistent with Chapter 13 in the bylaws. And we went back, when we did the research, that's what we learned, that the intent was to make this change through an article a few years ago, and it just didn't happen. So we're submitting it now as a housekeeping article, really just to delete the sentence that says that the town hall should be open continuously from 8:30 to 5 every business day. We should point out to you that the way town council wrote this article, he then says, as amended, the second paragraph of section 4D6 would read, and he leaves the second sentence in. You have another article coming before you from the Town Government Study Committee that relates to the Personnel Board. They're making some changes to this sentence. So if you were to accept or to recommend favorably under our article, your recommendation probably should just go to the deletion and leave out what we've put into the article as what the second paragraph would read, because that would be another article that makes something different. We did ask the Town Government Study Committee if they would be interested in incorporating our change into their article, and we haven't heard back from them, so I don't know if they're going to do that. And I know they're still discussing with the Personnel Board their article for Chapter 13.
I have one question.
Hold on one second. Katie, Chair Conlon, would you mind just going over that one more time? Where would you suggest the change be to the recommendation?
Well, if you were to mirror this language, then delete the section that says, as amended, the second paragraph of Chapter 13, Section 4D6 would read the Personnel Board in the rest of the sentence. So just take that out of the recommendation, because it would conflict. It may conflict. I was at one of the Government Study Committee meetings, and they were toying with this sentence. So it would conflict with what we think they're going to be putting forward.
So one of the potential consequences of removing that would be that you could then set any hours, right?
Yeah.
Hours other than...
This sentence that is for individual employees, but
okay.
Right now, by deleting the sentence that says the town hall should be open continuously between 8:30 and 5 every business day, that's not the current practice.
Right, on Friday,
so the idea is just delete that as a housekeeping measure, just to conform to what the existing reality is.
Right.
And that's why I think that if you were to just recommend that sentence be deleted and not say, and then the paragraph would continue with this sentence, that would not raise any inconsistencies with what the study committee puts forward in a separate article.
Just want to reread it. Does anybody else have any questions? Maggie?
Is this the town hall or all town-owned buildings for all employees?
Just town.
Town hall.
And-
Well, it says all offices of the town, so
Well-
like DPW, they're under the same.
But I know cemetery, DPW, I mean, other than police and fire, there are other departments that don't go by this, is that
Well,
right?
police and fire are unique.
Right, but you have DPW, you have you have, I think cemetery, I think there's another department. Parks. So why is it that they're not being incorporated to, I mean, if you're doing it for one, I should think it should be for
The
all.
sentence we're deleting says all offices of the town, so it
But
would be deleting it
currently
for all
now, you
offices.
do exclude some of the offices, only town hall. So I'm just thinking in the
They're all
future,
in the same unions. I mean, there's a lot of,
yeah, that's why I'm confused. How come they don't
I mean,
get
the
to go home
clerical
at
staff, depending
1:30
on
on
what department they're in,
Friday?
they're in the,
And then if people from town hall, let's say a department grows, and now they're not in the town hall building, does that mean that now they're not gonna be able to take advantage? They're gonna lose this privilege and then have to work like the other departments outside of
they're
town
all
hall?
subject to collective bargaining, so their union contracts dictate a lot of this now. This is just the Chapter 13 bylaw.
And first of all, this is removing that
Yes.
section from the bylaws. So it would
say
allow
that. Take it
basically
out.
the town to set the hours that it determines necessary.
Well, I guess I'm confused why the town at the beginning set the hours for town hall. I mean, I remember reading in the Milton Times that you used to go home at 11:30 when it began on Friday, so the employees could enjoy the summer. And then they worked Thursday evening, I believe, and then something got changed, and now it's 1:30. But don't the rest of the
I thought it was
employees?
11:30, that,
I'm not
I just don't
positive.
know about the history there.
Yeah.
That's probably
I
before
looked
my
it
time.
up.
I
Don't
do
the
remember there
regular?
was a change in it.
Yeah. Don't the other employees all in the town, if you're gonna do something and let people here go home at 1:30, shouldn't all of the other
It's based on their
departments?
union
So
contract.
this,
Bargain.
this
It's
is
like
just,
the
this
bargaining
is just a
agreement.
bylaw that was written a long time
Yeah.
ago. So we're deleting the sentence that says that they have to be open until 5, because they're not. So the collective bargaining agreements have language in there about what the working hours are. So all we're doing is taking out a sentence so that there's not some sentence on the books that's inconsistent with what the bargaining agreements say.
So are administrative staff in town hall different than administrative staff in
No,
Acton?
they're in the same union.
So then, but they're working full-time on Fridays?
I don't think so. If they're in the same union, then they're probably not.
The town hall administrative personnel are working 37 and a half hours. They're getting their hours in during, they may make it up Monday through Thursday, but that gives them the wherewithal to close town hall at 1:30 on a Friday.
Well, I know you have a lot of people in the same unions, and so I'm somewhat confused why they didn't have the same contracts, I guess.
I think they would. If-
Yeah,
if
that
they're-
would make
If they're in the
sense,
same
right?
union, they have the
That's
same
right.
contract.
Yeah.
Yes. And police and fire obviously are different, because they're 24/7, and firefighters work 24-hour shifts, so those are separate agreements that don't have language in there about hours closing at
I have a
1:30.
funny feeling, parks, cemetery, all of them are now gonna come to you and wanna go home now at 1:30 like the rest.
Any of
They're all
those
subject-
flex
they're all
time
in
things,
collective
it's
bargaining.
always subject to management's need to
Right.
have the thing open, so it's not an open and shut that they can just demand it. Flex time is a privilege, it's not a right, so.
Most of those operational departments start earlier too, in the morning. Their hours are different than 8 to 5, 9 to 5.
So this article is intended to be a housekeeping article. It's not intended to promote any
Change it,
controversy
yeah.
or change or get employees to start asking for anything that they don't currently have.
So what is the personnel board, I guess, going to incorporate in this?
The Town Government Study Committee is revising the entire Chapter 13, but they're working with the Personnel Board on that. And, you know, having been at their meeting, I think there's some disagreement on some pieces of that article that both boards are still working out. The only reason I am suggesting you not mirror in the recommendation what that second part of the article is that you could create an inconsistency.
Right.
In the warrant.
And maybe in the comment, if you have the existing with that red line, that would be more, there's no context when you just say take out something.
I was looking for the bylaws, I got them as of 2007.
Good job.
Yeah, I know. That's as far up to
I
date as they
know.
are online.
But there is a personnel bylaw, I did look it up. I think you guys made it, or someone put it, maybe last December, they started writing something for Chapter 13, it was online.
The Town Government Study Committee.
Yes, right, I did read that.
Any other questions?
Motion to approve the recommendation as written.
Second?
Thanks, Maggie. I'm sorry, did you have a question, Lucinda?
No, I
Any
have a
other
second.
discussion? Maggie beat you to it. All those in favor? Unanimous then. Okay. Thank you. So that was on our list, Chapter 13, amending work hours.
We're making progress.
Right, alcohol sales tax, we're gonna defer until the 8th. Are you actually thinking about withdrawing that one?
Yeah, I think we're going to reopen it and withdraw that. Well,
Okay.
till October.
Yep, Selectman
Burns. Yeah.
Burns said that it might come back. Maybe the recommendation will be to refer it back for more study, and then it could come back potentially in October.
Correct. Yeah.
So, but we'll wait on that to get his.
Yeah,
to
we'll
hear
probably
from
put
him.
it on our agenda to talk about on Tuesday, and then we'll
Okay.
decide whether to, withdraw or to defer it, or to ask you to recommend that it be deferred. The next one in my package is the stabilization fund for roads.
Mhm.
Tom was kind of the driving force behind that.
So what this article does is it sets up a special purpose stabilization fund with, in the non-contingent budget with no funding. I mean, if money drops out of the sky, great, but the way it's set up, special purpose stabilization funds oftentimes are funded by override money, specific override money. And what happens with them is, and this is what I'm suggesting for the contingent budget, and let me back up first. Every year in the capital committee, we get a request for $1.3, $1.4 million for, additional funding for road improvements over and above our Chapter 90 money. We get about approximately $700,000 a year in Chapter 90 money, and that's virtually all the money that goes into road improvements. There is no other unless we, in the capital committee, and we've been trying to, but, we'll throw, another $500,000 at it. Our pavement management plan basically says, I think we need something like $2.1 or $2.2 million every year to basically start making a dent in, we're just so far behind in, behind pace in our capital, in our pavement management plan that you'd need about $2.1, $2.2 million just to make a dent in it. And I forget what Joe said, but it was, we'd catch up with it in about 60 years or something like that. I forget what it was. But yeah, everybody knows the condition of the roads are just awful. We're not much different than other towns, other than we probably get twice as much traffic on our roads than the average town because of where we're located. This was an idea to, in the contingent side of the budget, to maybe say we would fund it with, say, $500,000 of that would go into the special purpose stabilization fund. That would increase every year. The way those overrides work for special purpose stabilization is it's selectmen controlled thereafter. That, in other words, once approved by the voters, that $500,000 would be allowed into the special purpose stabilization. The selectmen then, year after year, would vote to continue it or to reduce it if it were no longer necessary. Usually special purpose stabilization is put in there to save for a unique purpose. It could be buying a fire engine, it could be a small building, it could be anything you want it to be, but it's a specific purpose. So we felt that road maintenance is a specific purpose. If we fund it with the $500,000 on an override vote, then each year the selectmen would have to approve the continued appropriation of the money. If the selectmen approve a smaller amount, then that sets the ceiling for what can be appropriated year after year. So in other words, if the selectmen said, well, we don't really need $500,000 anymore, let's reduce it to $300,000, then that next year you could only appropriate $3, and the year after that you'd be stuck with the 3 plus 2.5%. Once approved, it can be used for that purpose without further vote of the town meeting.
But before you get to that scenario, there would be a vote of town meeting for the amount.
You'd need a vote of town meeting to both approve the article to establish the special purpose stabilization fund.
Mhm.
And then you'd need a separate vote, and that, my idea would that be on the contingent budget to actually fund it with override money.
Does the current fiscal year 18 contingent budget, in your mind, include any money for roadways that you would want to go into this?
At this point, no, I think we'd have to take a hard look at what we are doing with our, with our contingent budget. Right now, it doesn't, I don't believe.
Does not.
So.
That's still being put together too,
Yeah.
obviously. So the article's
Right.
been submitted and
Right.
it does request, doesn't it request an appropriation?
To see what amount.
Yeah, to see what,
But I don't think we were contemplating making the non-contingent deficit any worse. So, if it were so all we're asking on the non-contingent budget is to establish the stabilization fund, not to necessarily fund it. It could be funded out of one-time money, as it occurs from year to year if you want to. But it would be there as a place to park money for the purpose of maintaining roads.
I don't necessarily see the need for a special purpose stabilization fund rather than just a line item in the DPW budget. What is the pro and con of that? Because it seems like a special purpose stabilization fund allows you to build up a large balance, which helps you to expend monies in the future for a large project. But it seems like whatever amount we're going to allocate to roads, it will be spent in the existing year.
Right. The idea is this commits it to that. Once established, no future, you can kill it if you want to, but no future board could say, okay, well, we're going to appropriate that and use it for something else. You can't do it. It is appropriated for nothing else but for roads. That's the purpose of it. It makes it extremely difficult to use it for anything else other than road repair.
All right, and then to Chair Conlon's point, I don't think it does address what amount to be appropriated.
No, it doesn't. It wouldn't. So that would be a recommendation of this committee.
But I don't see where it fits in this article.
Recommendation. You don't recommend it in the article, you recommend it in the recommendation.
can't act on anything relating there too.
Yeah.
Which,
So you're saying that it would need a new sentence that says something like, and the amount of X dollars be...
in the recommendation, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because sometimes you put in no appropriation at this time.
Yeah.
Or whatever, so it's at the end.
Well, I would think that it's too soon for us to take action on that because, Mr. Dennehy, you're still working on your budget. The schools are still working on their impact
It is,
statements.
yeah. I mean, other than you could take action on the fund itself, but in terms of the amount of dollars, I don't think you could at this point.
So then, if we determine, Tom, that there is no money, even under the contingent budget request to allocate to this special purpose stabilization fund, would you still encourage
I
the
would
warrant
still
committee
encourage
to
it,
create it
yes.
with no appropriation?
Yes, because then at least it's there as a repository, for, one-time money in the future, or at a later town meeting, the next override, but at least it's there established. And, similar to what we do a lot of time with free cash, maybe we put it in there just to make sure it's there, in addition to whatever we can do on the capital committee.
Do they ever have bond money for the roadways? And if you establish this stabilization fund, if you're able to get certain bond money or money back, can it go into this fund for roadway work, earmarked for it specifically in the future?
I don't think you can put bond money in there. I don't think you can
Or
specifically
certain,
bond
you know how
for
they
it.
have certain,
One money you have to spend in 24 months
Yeah, so you,
for a little bit.
and I don't think you can put, bond premium money in there either. You can go in the capital stabilization fund, but, and there was a recent change to that by the modernization Bill.
I don't know the answer to that.
I
We'd have
forget
to-
what it is.
We could
but-
ask that
Curious.
question, but
Yeah.
we,
Because you're trying to earmark money into this for the roadways. It'd be nice if there were other ways that you could get the money back in there.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly, most types of one-time money,
Yeah.
that could be appropriated into it. But Lee Michael's right, is if it goes in there, it's probably gonna get expended the next year. But once in,
Chapter 70.
Yeah.
what's that?
In addition to Chapter 70, not in lieu of.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably with some kind of a match from the capital, recommendation from capital planning, which, again, is either free cash or bonding, depending upon, I think in most cases, we recommend bonding it, I believe.
Just to give a little bit of background, the Warrant Committee last year endorsed under its early contingent budget the creation of a new line, I think it was in DPW, that allocated a certain amount of money to roadway construction. And I think, Tom, at that point, you made the observation that if that passes an override, after that year is in the history books, then, as you mentioned tonight, boards are then free to reallocate that
That's
money
right.
as they see fit, and the Warrant Committee can make future recommendations. And because of the nature of municipal finance, every year that you're not having an override, you're essentially cutting somewhere.
That's right.
Unless your revenues are way up for some reason.
That's
so, if you have a line item that has a large amount associated with roads, and we're used to not spending what we're supposed to be spending on our roads, and you need to cut somewhere, it makes it an attractive thing to remove. And
Yeah.
so I think Tommy made the point that the permanency last year around having a stabilization fund is attractive to you, so that
That's right.
it can't be rated or whatever.
Yep.
Other questions? Michael?
We did vote to throw an extra $500,000 towards the roads, I think, earlier, so would that be where this would go, that kind of we take it from wherever we said we were going to put it into this, a recommendation to put it in the stabilization fund?
Yeah, when we
Probably,
revote,
yeah, at that point, yeah, if you did. I
we
mean,
could.
Okay.
It's an option.
That was the plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? So this is one we probably need to hold off on a little while and see how everything develops. But it sounds like even if we find that we can't allocate any additional monies to the roads, that you would still want us to create this with no appropriation at this time. And does anybody have any questions about that? Because we're going to have to revisit this later, and these three folks might not be at the table. Okay. Chair Conlon, what would you like to do next?
The capital article, which I don't have the full language on, but the changes were fairly minor, and it was just the amount and the life.
The
term
biggest
of the
change, and
project.
Steve actually sat on the committee that, the subcommittee that really did all this stuff.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
But the biggest part of it was, right now, anything over $10,000 is considered capital. We've got a couple of problems on the capital committee. One is, because of our tight budgets, almost everything we see coming into the capital committee is smaller dollars, repair and maintenance kind of stuff, really not capital. But there's no other place to go for it, because there's not enough room in the budget for it. And one-time money gets chewed up pretty quickly. So it does go there. So this was an attempt at least to bring it from 10,000 up to 25,000, to try and get more of that smaller money into the operating budgets and out of the capital budget.
10,000 been the threshold
For
since at
years.
least 97.
Right, yeah, if you just add inflation to it, you're up there.
Makes sense.
But what does happen, you gotta appreciate the laundry list of stuff we look at every year, and we're supposed to be doing 5-year planning. We spend all our time looking at just the 1 year, because there's just so much of it. And it's hard because it's all little stuff, and what'll happen is the next year, if we don't approve it, that little stuff's gone. It's not there the next year. So if you try to map it out and say, okay, here's a $10,000 thing we want in 2021, chances are next year it won't be on the list anymore. So it's really hard to do capital planning when things keep changing on you. I mean, you expect some change, but that's why typically capital planning is on bigger items. It's on, it's on things you can really wrap your hand, fire stations, DPW facility, we know we need those. We can take a look at, roofs and, the structures on a lot of our buildings, the bigger ones, and kind of say, based upon a study, here's where this thing's gonna need to be replaced, and kind of plan for it. But to plan for a $10,000 whatnot, is just, it isn't really helpful to anybody. So that's the reason we're going to the 25 at least. And then the, Steve, you want to talk about the 5 to 10?
The bonding?
Yeah.
Item 2 on the board behind you. It would essentially increase the length of time considered for projects that come before the capital planning committee, right?
Yeah.
So instead of projects that
The useful life of it.
yeah, instead of projects that have a useful life of 5 or more, it would be 10 or more.
Make it more sensible to bond it.
Right.
Instead of doing 5-year bonds. So that does what Tom was talking about, driving bigger stuff toward the capital planning process and driving out littler stuff.
Yeah.
Is there the possibility of any adverse effects where those smaller projects won't then have a place to go because they don't belong in operating budgets, but they can't then go to the capital planning improvement committee?
It
Well,
pushes them into operating budgets.
Right.
Or it allows them to be there, right?
It pushes them into, small, if you need what was it, 10, you need $11,000 lawnmower.
Mhm.
You don't need to borrow for that. You should have that in your equipment line.
Okay.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, thank you. Other people have questions about this? You have to come up with questions for at least 1 minute so that I can make the recommendation.
Oh, I can come up with a stupid question.
Michael?
I got a dumb question. Is there some way, it's great that you have the 5 and the 10 years, no one's changed, devalued the year, but the 25,000, you think that some warrant committee in 10 years is gonna say, geez, $25,000, you can barely buy, a hamburger for that, So, we're gonna need to change that again. So is there a way to kind of set that dollar limit to be tied to something else that's?
Like the CPI, Consumer Price Index.
And then in 10 years of
Let's,
warranty.
this is like not so much a question, it's like an open forum
There
to
we
take,
go.
and let me know when I can stop my
Yeah,
question.
You're done. I'm good.
Okay.
Just
Should I just go, in the words of Emily Latella, never mind?
never mind. Thank you. That was so helpful, Michael. Are there any other questions besides Michael's question on this article or this
Which
recommendation?
will go unanswered.
Motion to approve the recommendation as written.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mahalchek. Any other discussion? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Think we could potentially do one more? Is that right? Oh, no, I guess not. Was that the end of your list?
I think so.
that's it,
Do you
yeah.
have others?
No, we don't.
That's great.
I think that's it for
We know
tonight.
which ones we're deferring to the 8th, but I don't think there are any others that we've submitted.
Yep.
You guys are
We
good.
submit that for
Yeah.
the citizens.
So we have 6 more to discuss on the
Playground,
8th.
no, that's not ours, that's of citizens, so. And you've already heard from the playground planners. So.
They were good.
And do you have
Goes back
any,
to Meg.
do you have any comments that you want to make at this point on the 2 that we're reviewing from the Town Government Study Committee or the 3 that we're reviewing from the Planning Board?
The chief procurement officer, we co-sponsored. They asked us if we would, and we voted to co-sponsor that. They're still working on that. We've given them some input and some comments about should it include town and school. There were some other comments that we gave them. I'm trying to remember offhand what they were.
Full-time, part-time.
Yes.
And whether they need to be I saw you guys do that meeting.
Whether, whether they had to be certified or
Not
whether.
a 3-year time period.
Right.
See, I remember this. This is
Those are, so,
bad.
but the government study, they're really the ones doing all the work on that, so they're going to present that to you, but we have provided some comments back to them. The Personnel Board one, I think we want to see how the discussion goes between the study committee and the personnel board, because there seemed to be, I did attend their meeting just for the procurement officer, but that night, most of the discussion was about the personnel bylaw, and there were some areas of disagreement between the personnel board and the government study committee, and I'm not sure where they're at this point, whether they're all in agreement or whether there are still issues that they're working out. So I think we might want to defer any position on that until we see where the committee comes out. That is something we've asked the committee to look at, but the personnel board has raised some good points during the discussions.
It sounds like you haven't yet had a full presentation from the Fire Station Space Committee and not yet ready to weigh in on the Fire Station Building Committee, but it would be interesting to hear your opinion of that article after you've done that, and especially on the funding of it. So that's another one. Would we want to create that committee and potentially not fund it if there isn't room in the contingent budget to do so, or does that create a committee that can't do anything then?
We have not discussed it as a board. We have had presentations by that committee about what their plans are for the stations.
Right, capital planning has not discussed it either,
Okay.
I don't believe. And it would be a capital project, certainly. My initial reaction is, since we don't have a capital project approved by town meeting, I'm not sure trying to fund $2 million, if we could even do it, because you can't bond it, or you can bond it
Amy said you could bond
such
it
a very short period of time, though.
for 5 or less years.
Yeah. Which would kill your...
What'd you say?
With the expectation you're gonna build it.
Yeah, she said you could only bond it for a max of 5 years because the rest of the project isn't yet approved.
Right. So that would be problematic, obviously.
And for the committee's benefit, I mean, I've recused myself on bonding issues because the law firm that I work for is the town's bond counsel. But, so obviously, Tom and David would be the majority of our board speaking to that, and I would be recused. But we have not discussed their article. The only discussion we've had was to accept it to reopen the warrant and close it to accept that article, because there was a glitch and it's being filed on time. But that's the only discussion we've had about it.
Okay.
And our committee, I think, would normally anyway want to see what the capital committee's input would be before
Right.
the Board of Selectmen would weigh in on something like that.
All right, well, maybe, Michael, you can bring back word of whatever future discussion they have at the Board of Selectmen meeting. So we're going to have some more input on that one before we come to a recommendation, I think.
Certainly.
Or if you're able to discuss it before March 8th, you could bring some opinion then as well. Okay.
I think the only other thing, as long as Mike is here, and is Mike's idea of the LED project, which seen some of the chatter going back with Steve and Mike and myself on, how to potentially fund that thing. And I think Steve's idea makes tremendous sense.
I agree.
The rest of the warrant committee hasn't seen Steve's
I
idea.
haven't seen that either, so I'm not sure what Tom's talking about.
The idea is to, rather than do it as a 2-year project, to take a loan out of basically a loan out of the capital stabilization fund.
Right.
And repay it with the cost
1%
savings
interest, yeah.
with 1% interest. So you'd get the entire town done in a year rather than 2. We'd appropriate, it is a capital project, so we can clearly use capital stabilization fund money for it, and then we have a definite way of replacing it. It's
Interesting.
the project's got like a 4-year payback, so.
Creative idea, Steve. We get a lot of creative ideas out of Tom, and we're going to really miss that come May, but we know where
He's
he
not
lives. We
going
know where
away.
he lives.
He'll
We'll still
just
be
have
on
a
the
different
Affordable
title.
Housing Trust, the capital committee will hold it.
We can call him in when we need him, yeah.
There is
Okay.
one other thing I just want to briefly mention. The planning board submitted a moratorium article for recreational marijuana. We have been talking a little bit with town council. There's been some programs that some of us have gone to. The MMA program was one of them. There was a conference that the Norfolk County District Attorney sponsored that several people from town were at, including members of the Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition. And as a result of the ballot question that passed in November, there's a lot of confusion at the state level about recreational marijuana and the impact that it could have on medical marijuana, and we've mentioned that a little bit when we had the application that was before us for the Swift Hat Shop building. But we're talking with town council about the possibility of submitting a ballot question to the voters to ban facilities that would cultivate, manufacture, or sell adult use recreational marijuana in town. That wouldn't apply to anybody growing their own plants or individual consumption. It would just be sales or cultivation or manufacture facilities in cafes. there's real confusion based on the way the law is written at the state level as to whether, it sounds like you need a question decided by the voters, but you also need a town meeting article. So there's a possibility, however remote, but it's possible that we may reopen and close the warrant within the next couple of weeks in order to add an article that would seek a vote of the town meeting to ban recreational. And that way, it would go to town meeting in May, and it would be influenced by what the voters decide on the April ballot, if we're able to get the question on the April ballot. So there's a possibility that we may be submitting another article to you that relates to recreational marijuana. You do have the temporary moratorium that the planning board has submitted, but in light of some of these recent conferences and the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association looking for guidance at the state, there's a lot of advice that towns should act quickly in this area. So that's a possibility.
All right. Even though you told me you were going to try to have less articles. Than
Yeah, but
I hear you.
We may be taking one of the alcohol sales tax one might be something
Trade that
David
one.
might want to defer that one, so.
Okay.
Well, keep in mind, we didn't have an October town meeting this year, too, so I got to catch up, you know.
And some of ours are pretty easy. The planning board's ones are the really tough one, the ones that are going to take a lot of your time.
We
You never
love
know
it.
which one's gonna take all the time.
That's true. Sometimes at town meeting, you don't know what will get the discussion.
The common.
But their articles are at least much longer than ours.
Okay, I think that we're done with questions. I have one quick announcement, but anything else for the Board of Selectmen or Mr. Dennehy?
I don't think so.
Great. If you want to hang out, it's just going to take 1 second. I made a mistake earlier when I was going over the future meetings. At the last meeting, we had a discussion about, I'll just read it to you. We had a discussion about adding a meeting on February 27th in order to discuss the impact reports that we get for the meeting on the on February 22nd. So what I showed you earlier just had February 22nd and March 1st on it. We added a meeting on Monday, February 27th. So the next 3 meetings to rehash are February 22nd, which is a Wednesday, February 27th, which is a Monday, and March 1st, which is that Wednesday. Okay, so we'll have 2 meetings that week, just as a reminder. That wasn't on the schedule I showed you earlier. Sorry about that. Any other questions for tonight?
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you, Michael. All those in favor? Good night, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.